In this story, the main character was just an observer of the lives of noble aristocrats, so she knew too well the story of Fionia Felicia, who tried to marry the prince. But the heir to the throne, named Rita Ortus, decided not to trust this girl. Few people knew that in fact this guy's heart had been taken for a long time, but he kept silent about it. When anger clouds the eyes of the emperor's family, no one dares to oppose their words. But one young lady named Lily Albeolos couldn't stand to see her friend being scolded. The heir had a weakness only for this girl, although he did not want to admit it to anyone. But his emotions betrayed the guy, who was not very good at hiding his feelings. This is how the heroine became a witness to how unpleasantly events unfold in this novel. Since Seraphi Validus came to this world, she has tried to change many things on her own. This scene haunted her even at the moment when the girl in her world read its details. Rita Ortus cruelly accused Theonia of atrocities to which the girl was not involved. The result was that Felicia was forever cursed in society, since everyone obeyed the prince, and the poor girl was forced to suffer for the rest of her life because she fell in love the wrong way. To prevent this from happening, the heroine put in a lot of effort, but did not completely change the plot. Seraphi had long worked for the future of Fionia, who was useful in her plans. She didn't even pay attention to the aristocrat named Looney Mars, although she tried to get closer to her. But the heroine was only concerned that neither Fionia nor Lily would remain close to the cruel prince. Unlike the original story, Felicia had the courage to admit her mistakes this time, so Ortus didn't achieve much in breaking off his engagement to a girl he didn't love. This lady was the first to give up all the obligations of the engagement, just so as not to communicate with the prince anymore. Only Validus knew how great a blow this was for the heir to the throne. No matter how much the girl wanted this, she had no right to interfere with the plot even more. So Rita had every chance of winning the love of his dear Lily Albeolos. The guy's only mistake was that for this lady, friendship turned out to be much more important than feelings. Her face expressed ardent confidence, despite the fact that Lily had hit the prince himself. None of the aristocrats expected that the young girl would be so obstinate and confident. Even Seraphi did not predict such behavior from Lily, who always seemed timid and obedient to her. But now, for Albeolos, there was no one more important than the disgraced Fionia. They had known each other since childhood, although they had taken very different paths throughout their lives. But this friendship was so dear to Lily that she did not hesitate to give up her princess status for the sake of her friend. Such support and devotion sank into the very heart of Fionia, who usually did not trust people. In fact, it was strange for Felicia to realize that she no longer felt anything for the prince. The girl's heart opened to other people who were always there and loved her. And one of these people was Lily, who was not afraid to object to the heir to the throne himself. That's why Fionia easily decided to leave the banquet with her friend. If before the girls sometimes avoided each other, now all this was forgotten forever. Deep down, Lily had always been drawn to Felicia, even though she knew they were on opposite sides. It was the heroine's support that led the two childhood friends to complete understanding and acceptance. That's why the girls were expected to be grateful to the lady who opened their eyes to men. In fact, Seraphi would prefer to refuse loud thanks addressed to her, but the girls she helped throughout her life wanted to express all their gratitude, so Validus had to humbly accept their embrace, which confirmed their love and care. Previously, the lady would never have allowed any of the noble ladies to behave like that in society. But the heroine remembered that Lily possessed light magic, so she could be useful to her, and legends circulated throughout the empire about how well Fionia dealt with dark magic. So Seraphi didn't resist when these strong girls reached out to her with all their hearts. She herself did not expect that her actions would have such a strong impact on the friendship between the two former rivals. All Validius did was look for ways to return to her native and simple world. And eventually, she even attracted the attention of Orcus Felicia, who was famous for his difficult character. And now this guy did not leave Seraphi's side for a single step, and she had struck him to the depths of his soul. Let's find out how all the heroine's adventures in this world led to this result, and how Validus got into a situation from which she will not be able to return home. This whole story of reincarnation began in the heroine's life about a year ago in the mansion of Duke Validus. As soon as the lady opened her eyes for the first time in her life in this body, a sharp pain pierced her with realization. The girl never wanted to get into a romance, especially one in which she was destined to die soon. And in the end, the heroine had to come to terms with the fact that she was now the daughter of a terrible man. Even a full knowledge of the plot was of little help to the lady who now became Seraphi Validus. The girl was lucky, and she understood the language and text of the novel well, so she quickly adapted to the environment. But this did not reduce the heroine's problems, because the desire to return home grew with each passing day. She remembered well that at that moment, Duke Validus continued to lose everything in gambling. The lady could not expect help from her mother, as she was undergoing serious treatment. The girl's body itself was also in poor condition due to constant beatings from her drunken father. That's why Seraphi was afraid that she wouldn't be able to live longer than her predecessor in the novel. The saddest thing was that the Duchess was not in a position to demand a divorce from her husband, and intimacy with her father will in any case lead the heroine to die at his hands. That's why the first thing Seraphi did was go to the library to get books about laws. The girl believed that she could sue the Duke for all his funds if she went to court. But the search turned out to be much more difficult than Validus thought at the very beginning of this long journey. The heroine didn't know the laws of this world at all, so she had to face problems. One of those days, the lady got lucky for the first time in her life and met a handsome guy in the library. It was a young man named Carl Iris from a fairly wealthy and famous family in the Empire. The girl could only dream of such a meeting, since the guy had always been a good knight. So the lady felt comfortable in his presence, although she was used to not trusting any man. However, now Seraphi would not mind any help, because she had very little time left. Luckily, Carl was one of those people who could never refuse a lady when she needed help. That is why he nobly put aside all his affairs for the sake of a girl from a good Validus family. What struck the young man most was the volume of books that the little-known lady had chosen for herself. But Seraphi was so serious that she commanded the respect of everyone around her. As a result, Iris became so interested in the affairs of the Duke's daughter that he stayed with her until the very end. And this kindness from the knight played into the heroine's hands, who managed to figure out how to use it. Of course, Seraphi wasn't a bad person. She just desperately wanted to survive in this world, so she had to involve in her affairs everyone who was even a little willing to help. In fact, Carl didn't stay by the lady's side for no reason, because he had heard about her father's cruelty. Iris felt genuinely sorry for this girl who was trying to find salvation among the laws and rules. He would have been glad to help the lady even more, but Seraphi held herself with the dignity of an aristocrat. Like many in high society, Charles was aware of the cruel life of the Duke's daughter. That's why the guilt of inaction slowly ate away at the young man from the inside, as soon as he met the lady. This is exactly what the heroine took advantage of, since she had a cunning plan and a medallion with her. The girl needed the guy to return this thing to her at a certain time and in the right place. Like a true knight, Carl could not refuse, although this whole story seemed strange to him. But the guy wanted to ease Seraphi's suffering so much that he promised to fulfill her request. This is how the heroine got a chance to survive in this story that predicted her imminent death. But the lady did not stop there, as she needed support from her devoted servants. Miss remembered that Duke Validus had mocked them too, although to a lesser extent. So Seraphi had every chance of winning over his assistants to his side in this matter. Naturally, the butler was shocked that the girl was planning to kick her father out of the house. Before, no one dared to complain about the rule of the man who led the entire Validus family. But his actions outraged many, so it was time for Seraphi to act. In fact, the assistant had long been waiting for the moment when the Validus family would begin to develop properly. And in the young lady, he saw a chance for salvation, because she was the best copy of her terrible father. The butler did not hesitate for long about whether it was worth betraying his master for the sake of a good future. The confidence in Seraphi's eyes told him that this girl would be able to save her family, but the old man's fears were so great that the maids quickly noticed changes in his behavior. The butler did not believe that the Duke's daughter would be able to win back anything from her cruel father. Meanwhile, the heroine had already begun to act, although she had not fully convinced the servants of her plan. But in a short time, the girl was able to collect money, since she knew a lot about the future. And the lady decided to start by slightly increasing the wealth she had already acquired. Of course, the miss took the butler with her, so that he could witness her incredible success. But the man had no idea that Seraphi would turn to various bets for help. The girl started everything by buying lottery tickets, ignoring the old man's anxiety. No matter how hard the butler tried to reason with the young lady, She did not listen to a single word he said. The heroine remembered perfectly well which tickets were the winning ones, so she took advantage of this, while the assistant's heart was ready to burst from fear, because they could lose a lot. He was most worried at the moment when Valideuse put all her last money on the line. The old man was sure that it was impossible to win in matters that were connected with luck and fate. But the butler had to come to terms with the fact that Seraphi had long since grown up and did not listen to his advice. No one knew that the heroine behaved this way only because she was confident of a big win. All the old man's worries disappeared the moment the girl returned to him with increased wealth. This is how the lady was able to carry out her first plan, laying a brick in the foundation for returning home. The time has not yet come for the lady to reveal her vast knowledge to the people. She understood that no one in the empire would be ready for the truth about reincarnation among people. Everyone around trusted only the emperor and his heirs, as well as the main families among the knights. All the leading figures in the empire would periodically gather for small talk with Prince Esther Ortus. The boy was renowned as one of the wisest heirs, although he had little claim to the throne. Orcus Felicia, who always chose his own life, also listened to his opinion. This time, the guys were looking into the case of Seraphi, who wanted to take all the rights to rule from her father. And Esther was confident that with a little luck and courage, the girl would succeed. Unlike his friends, Karl was very worried about Validus, who had planned a difficult task. He never regretted accepting the lady's medallion to help her in the future. Everyone knew very well about Seraphi's life, but people continued to do nothing because of the Duke's influence. But Iris was tired of feeling guilty and helpless because it was customary not to interfere in other people's affairs. Meanwhile, the assistants were also actively discussing Validus's behavior, which had changed significantly. They were worried that the young lady had made a lot of useless things in a short time. But in fact, the heroine was preparing hard for the trial with her father and was collecting evidence. She understood that the Duke had enormous connections, so it was impossible to rely on luck. But the girl had knowledge of the novel's plot on her side, which she used with pleasure. So, in a short time, the lady was able to accumulate a large pile of money, and she started small. That is why the girl managed to acquire a piece of land that will serve her well in the future. Seraphi, until the very end, ignored her assistants, who were not delighted with her actions. Now the lady could only hope that Karl would obediently fulfill her request. There was no time at all, since the butler announced the Duke's return to the estate. The heroine could not indefinitely put off dealing with the man who had caused her so much pain. Her heart trembled with fear at the thought that at any moment her plan could collapse. After all, in this case, the girl will suffer the same fatal fate that was described in the novel. So Seraphi couldn't make a mistake, because her life in this world and her return home were at stake. Duke Validus obeyed no one in the empire, because his wealth was enormous. No matter how much his loved ones tried to stop the man, he ignored all their words. The man liked to spend all his money on gambling and drinking, which cut him off from reality. But for the sake of her plan, the heroine tried one last time to stop her stubborn father. While in her mind, the lady prayed that Karl would arrive at the estate on time. And indeed, Iris did not possess it, since he arrived with the punctuality of a true knight. So it was time for Seraphi's real plan, which wasn't about saving his father at all. Only the butler was privy to the cunning plan that the young lady had long since hatched. Therefore, he calmly let the long-awaited guests into the estate, although he did not expect that Karl would take his friend. Meanwhile, Safari's expression completely changed as she wanted to provoke her father into being rude. According to her plan, the lady counted on her acquaintance arriving in the main hall of the estate on time. So he will witness the moment when Duke Validus, in a rage, attacks the lady who had previously been rude to him. But the girl had to rely on great luck, because she might not get there at the right time. And in that case, the girl would have suffered greatly from her father's blow, so it was a risky move. But this time, Seraphi was lucky, because Karl called Orcus with him, who saved the lady from her father in time. The guy himself didn't expect that his presence in the Validus estate would be so useful to the young lady. Iris was horrified that if he had not come at Seraphi's request, something irreparable could have happened. In fact, the heroine had already managed to mentally say goodbye to life at the sight of her terrible father's wrath. She made a very risky move, which was based on the kindness of the knight she met. And in the end, the girl's plan succeeded, since the Duke fell into a trap due to his cruelty and impudence. Now, the guys would never let this man go just like that, even though he was higher in status than them. After everything that happened, a desire to harm the Duke as revenge flared up inside the heroine. She didn't hesitate for a second before striking the nasty Duke once in front of the knights. Only later was the girl able to sincerely thank the guys for their help in capturing the owner of the estate. Neither Orcus nor Carl were against the lady pouring out her feelings to them after her release. The heroine was only glad that another person had joined her planned protector. In the court situation, she would need any help, as her position in society was precarious. Although the charges against the Duke were justified, he had too many connections. Contrary to Validus's expectations, Felicia was not eager to help her with the court proceedings. Moreover, the aristocrat suddenly quickly forgot about the knight's manners when the conversation turned to further assistance. Seraphi was not the type of person who could tolerate such rude treatment, even from a handsome guy. The gesture the girl showed was understandable to Orcus, although it was not used in this world. But the heroine's expression made it clearer than any words what she had just thought about the poor guy. Felicia was smart enough not to get into an argument with a girl who had recently experienced a lot of stress. Rumors of what happened in the famous Validus family spread among the people within a few days. Many aristocrats sided with the Duke, as they did not understand the full horror of his actions on the estate. So the heroine had to silently endure the fact that everyone around her condemned her for going to court with her own father. Seraphi quickly grew tired of the gossip that now constantly surrounded her, but she couldn't stop people from chatting. But she understood that now any action of hers would be immediately taken into account by other people. When news of Duke Validus's trial first became known, many servants were worried about it. However, the lady did not give in to the general panic, as she always met difficulties with dignity. She was confident that she could provide a good life for the servants, even if she lost the lawsuit with her father. The girl's self-confidence gave people hope that everything would really be okay with them. Of course, the lady could not help but prepare for a difficult meeting with her father in the main courtroom. And to begin with, Seraphi cut off her beautiful long hair, marking a new stage in her life. The heroine was prepared for such changes, but her maids reacted very badly. But if a girl asked the opinions of others, she wouldn't do many things. That's why Seraphi even allowed herself to go for night walks when she couldn't sleep because of the thoughts in her head. That night, she discovered that she was not alone in giving up sleep in favor of thinking in the fresh air. The butler has been thinking a lot about the young lady's situation lately and would like to express his devotion to her. Although the heroine carefully hid it, any support from loved ones was important to her. Although Miss planned to leave this world, she wanted to make it better for some people. Until then, the girl pretended to live happily and was trying only for the sake of the Validus family. But as soon as Seraphi met two old acquaintances, her face lit up with joy at the sight of them. The guys clearly didn't expect to see such a drastic change in Mrs. appearance, but the heroine still did not pay attention to the opinions that she did not ask others for. The girl was much more excited by the fact that Carl and Orcus took her side in the upcoming trial, but Felicia did not believe in Lady Validus's victory, although he helped her at the request of a good friend. Only Seraphi continued to believe in her own strength, as she had prepared well for her father's trial. When Orcus told his father about this matter, the man also did not believe that the lady would succeed, but he did not prohibit his son from participating in the trial, as it would be a good experience for him in the future. So the guy did his best to make sure that Lady Valedius would try to win in court. But the heroine didn't need consolation from a guy who himself didn't believe that anything would work out between them. It was not without reason that she gathered influential knights around her, because with their support, her chances of victory increased. What surprised the girl most was that the trial was held in such a beautiful and luxurious hall of the main building. Even her father dressed up properly, but for some reason, Miss missed this moment. But she didn't take this into account, because according to the law, a case could be won even without a nice outfit. Only Orcus noticed how worried the girl was, because her life depended on the outcome of the trial. In this place, no one was allowed to show their emotions, because it would be considered weakness. So only the appearance of Empress Giselle Ortus calmed the heroine a little from her anxiety. This woman was always famous for her wisdom, so with her, court cases never came to an unjust end. First, she ordered the Duke to speak, and she pinned the accusations of cruelty on his daughter. Naturally, the man immediately started shouting that he never even thought of making fun of Seraphi. But many in the courtroom saw the bruises and wounds that remained on the girl's body after her interaction with her father. However, this moment did not bother the Duke in the least, who believed that the liars would take his side. He remembered that one of the maids always had poor eyesight, which he took advantage of at this moment. Giselle listened in silence to Duke Validus, whose speech became louder and more furious. The man did not hesitate to show all the emotions that were burning within him due to the very fact of this trial. The two friends immediately guessed that the Duke was trying to reduce all the accusations to an ordinary family quarrel, and some of the aristocrats clearly believed him. As they looked at Seraphi with suspicion, the heroine was once again hit by a barrage of condemnation, since girls rarely contradicted adults. Only Fionia thought that this lady was far from being as simple as she seemed at first glance. None of the aristocrats expected that the heroine would bring with her all the evidence of a cruel life. The lady didn't need to go anywhere for them, because all the bruises were still visible on her body. Seraphi had prepared for the trial in advance, so she deliberately invited the drunken Duke to beat her. Due to his clouded mind, the man did not remember even half of the blows he had dealt. Only Orcus tried to stop the girl from publicly disgracing herself as she gradually undressed. But Seraphi didn't feel sorry for her reputation, because finally all the people around were looking only at her. Miss knew that she would have many other ways to survive, even if she ultimately lost in court. Although the lady did not plan to leave the man who had bullied her a lot unpunished, Felicia never expected to meet such a brave girl in her life. Seraphi was not afraid to honestly tell the Empress everything she thought about her own father. Giselle always liked aristocrats who defended their honor to the very end. It was the turn of the Duke's daughter to testify, and the boys were happy to speak in her defense. Even the assistants sided with the lady, as they were glad that their lives would also get better. Moreover, some of the maids were also subjected to cruel treatment, although they kept silent about it before. Only a few people helped the Duke, so they made up accusations against Seraphi. He recalled how the lady had resorted to gambling, which could have had dire consequences. The heroine did indeed play the lottery, but in reality, she had a reason for such behavior. The lady had documented all her victories, so there could be no questions asked of her. The heroine had come up with a legend in advance that she was simply following her good and lucky dream. The Empress could not ignore the fact that the girl won all the bets. The woman understood perfectly well how difficult this was for any person, so everyone was of the opinion that the Duke's daughter was a surprisingly lucky person. In fact, the heroine won only thanks to her knowledge of the plot, but she kept silent about it. The lady knew that this was not enough to make Giselle take her side in court. That's why Miss saved the most significant achievement she's ever received for last. The girl was able to find and buy the land that was once abandoned by the real gods. This place was known to many, because legends about it never lied. Many years ago, the gods who left this land left a precious stone on it. All magicians knew well how rare and powerful this incredible treasure was, and by a lucky chance, the heroine became the owner of this land and the stone on it. This information greatly interested the Empress, who was also searching for the abandoned territory. So Seraphi told how, after winning, she paid the salaries of all her assistants. One of the people in the hall also received this money, but still spoke out against the Duke's daughter. However, Lady Validus had no intention of being offended, since her affairs were still going well. Immediately after purchasing the land, she asked Duke Felicia to appraise it, and he confirmed the presence of the stone. His daughter Fionia had indeed noticed that her father had recently been drawn into some interesting business, but she couldn't even imagine that it would be Seraphi who would turn to him after purchasing the land. So, with just one sentence, the girl won in court, because she acquired enormous wealth. The Duke was most angry with his daughter, because she had not told him anything about her plans. The man always believed that Seraphi did not even have enough money to leave the estate, and in the end, she did something that incredibly interested the wife of the ruler of the empire. That is why Giselle listened to the words of Duke Felicia, who helped the young girl. While the heroine was watching the man, something seemed strange to her in his conversation. She remembered that in the original story, Felicia's family had rebelled against the new emperor, and in the end, she was quickly defeated. Although even Giselle herself listened to her, Seraphi had no answers as to why Felicia's entire known line had fallen so quickly. But now, the lady had no time to think about this nuance, because the Duke was still on her side. The girl had agreed with him in advance that she would give the discovered stone to the imperial family. while Duke Validus had nothing to offer the Empress. At the moment when Giselle announced the verdict, many held their breath in excitement. Even Karl and Orcus did not know exactly in whose favor the Empress would announce her verdict. The woman was always wise when it came to difficult decisions, which is why she was invited to court. And this time, she allowed all rights of rule to be transferred to the Duke's daughter, who proved her case. This is how the heroine won this case, which for many would have seemed impossible. Deep down, the lady had no doubt that she could win against her cruel father, but she saw that Orcus was worried about her until the very end, and even came to support her at the end. Previously, the girl received a scarf from the guy for good luck, and now he allowed her to keep it. The heroine's life in this strange novel gradually improved, and she was happy about it. Finally, the lady had real friends to whom she could trust her life. At that moment, the girl accepted with dignity the congratulations that she had earned after the trial. In fact, she had no plans to relax, even with such good friends by her side. The heroine remembered the entire plot of the novel well and was going to use it to the fullest. And now the lady had chosen a new target for herself, with whom she was going to establish a strong friendship. Fionia Felicia was known to everyone as a powerful magician, so Miss couldn't ignore her. But right now, the aristocrats were all around the Duchess in delight, so she couldn't leave. From now on, Seraphi's whole life would be like this, so the lady had to get used to it already. She knew how to enjoy the little things, so she was pleased that she had attracted Orcus to her side. While everyone around her was congratulating the Duchess, she tried not to think about the paperwork at the estate. But after the trial, she still had to return home soon, as the heroine was very tired. All the girl dreamed of now was to eat, take a warm shower, and go to bed. But the assistants believed in the lady's victory in advance, so they organized a banquet for her. The lady could not even imagine that in such a short time she would become so close to her father's servants. She was only too happy to share with him the delight of victory, because now life promised to get better. As soon as Seraphi allowed the servants to eat with her, Marin immediately pounced on the food. For the first time in their lives, the assistants received such a good table, because the Duke had always been cruel. The lady remembered that her father did not really take care of her husband, so she should visit her. The girl's heart sank with anxiety at the sight of her mother, who was still locking herself in her room. Now that Seraphi had won the case, the woman no longer had to hide from her strict husband. Miss was afraid that her mother would continue to love her father, whom she had married voluntarily, so the heroine couldn't help but tremble as she tried to catch Irene's frightened gaze. It turned out that the Duchess blamed herself for not leaving the room while her daughter was struggling. And in the end, the woman saw how strong the girl had become during her struggle with her cruel father, so she didn't hold a grudge against Seraphi for separating them from the owner of the estate. Irene understood perfectly well that her life would only get worse due to the presence of this man. The heroine did not expect that her mother would be on her side after all the love she felt for her father. She came to the woman to support her, but in the end, it was she who needed consolation. It was only in front of Irene that Seraphi finally admitted how difficult it had been for her all this time. So the support and understanding from her mother came in handy, as they gave the lady strength. Meanwhile, business was pressing, and the lady needed to take care of new outfits for herself. The maid, Marin, had identified this problem in advance, and therefore suggested going shopping. The heroine was surprised by how happy this assistant was about their first walk together. It turned out that the maid had long dreamed of this, but the previous Duke did not allow anything like that. And now life has become much easier, because there was no overseer standing over Seraphi's head. Only now did the lady realize how much she had changed everything in the estate just by driving out her father. As soon as she arrived at the store, she met two friends who often walked together. What Seraphi was most happy about was the opportunity to become friends with Fionia. She already knew Looney, and now there was only one girl's heart left to melt. Judging by Lady Mars's joyful look, she herself wanted to strengthen her relationship with Validus. So the Lady with Friendship's plan was much easier to implement than she initially expected. The heroine remembered a lot about Looney, who played a significant role in the original plot. Her wedding with Karl spread throughout the Empire, because this couple truly loved each other. It was a pleasant bonus for Seraphi that Mars got along well with Duke Felicia's daughter. That's why Validus tried to maintain good relations with the talkative aristocrat. But Luna's joy at the meeting was so uncontrollable that it almost swept away Seraphi. But thanks to this, Phaonia finally paid attention to the girl who won the case against her father in court. She personally helped the heroine with her outfits as a sign of respect, since she had never met such ladies before. True, over the next few days, the heroine heard nothing more from Felicia. Although the outfits from Phaonia arrived in perfect order, the lady felt a little sad due to the lack of communication. She had no idea that the butler had already prepared a huge number of letters for her. After winning the court case, Duchess Validus gained incredible popularity, and this is what she achieved. Now, Miss needed several days to sort through all the papers sent from the aristocrats. Since the heroine remembered all the important families well, she easily discarded unnecessary letters. But one envelope still made Seraphi stop at it, because it spoke of a marriage proposal. She was aware of the structure of the emperor's assistants, which included several noble families, and among them was Baron Caetio, who encroached on the possessions of the young Duchess Validus. This henchman of the crown prince began courting the girl immediately after his victory in court. It got to the point that his letters could be used to fuel a fireplace due to their huge quantity. The heroine assumed that her promotion would bring more responsibility, but there were also problems. So, within a couple of days of her new status, the lady had time to think about opening a funeral business. She was so preoccupied with how to get rid of Baron Caetio that she didn't notice the man next to her. It turned out that Orcus had come to visit the girl to check how she was coping with things. The lady staggered in surprise, so the guy had to use his reflexes and save her. This is how Felicia suddenly helped Seraphi stay safe, because the fall could have harmed her. No matter how grateful the heroine was to the knight, she had no time to thank him for this. Every few days, Orcus came to the girl to decide what to do with the land of the gods. He managed to get some support from the Tower of Magicians, but even that was not enough. Although Seraphi was familiar with the plot, she knew very little about the laws and rules of this world. And from the very beginning, this seemed strange to Felicia, who noticed gaps in the girl's knowledge. The heroine was surprised even by the most ordinary documents that were revealed to her during her work. But this lady somehow miraculously won the case, but she couldn't sort out the affairs of the estate. But the guy was in no hurry to bring any accusations against the girl, because he had nothing to scold her for. He liked Seraphi for her character, which was very different from the submissive behavior of other ladies. During their conversation, the lady increasingly thought about whether it was possible to tell Orcus the whole truth about herself. In the novel, this man was described as a cruel and immoral villain who could not be trusted. But the girl saw a completely different person in front of her, who constantly supported her. The guy treated the recent marriage proposals with the same disdain as she did. He had heard about Baron Caetio, who wanted to find a wife, but did not expect such a turn of events. Unlike Seraphi, Orcus was well aware of how the aristocrats tried to maintain hierarchy, so only the girl was angry at the fact that the Baron proposed to her in a regular letter. That's why he advised the lady not to simply ignore the Caetio family. Initially, it was a family that served God and did not use money at all. But everything changed the moment their ancestor found a huge amount of gold in the area. So it was not surprising that Baron Caetio was now trying to get closer to the famous Duchess. Felicia knew that none of the noble families would be able to say anything against the decision of this family. Only now did the girl realize that Baron Caetio had not actually treated her very well. But his status and power allowed any person from this family to lay claim to another family. Over the many years of their rule over a certain territory, the Caetio were able to achieve great wealth, so they could afford to spend money left and right, since their land was almost inexhaustible. These people were unable to ignore the fact that the land of the gods was found by some girl. Now, due to the territories she has acquired, the heroine has become a tasty morsel for many. The girl had no illusions about the sincerity of the Caetio family, because they only wanted profit. She was prepared for the fact that along with great power would come great responsibility. Like many noble families, the aristocrats pursued the lady only for the sake of spreading her influence. This is precisely what Phaonia indirectly tried to warn Seraphi about during their conversations. The Empress also knew about this, but she still sided with the Duke's daughter in court. Even the wise Orcus could not help the lady who found herself in a difficult situation. The guy went through this stage in his youth, although some girls still ran after him, so he understood perfectly well what a difficult period this was in the life of the newly made Duchess. Only Seraphi hoped, until the very end, that the changes in her life would not be so drastic. That is why Duke Felicia's son so diligently helped the girl in her business affairs. Since he lived in this world all his life, he remembered well all its cunning laws and complex rules. But the heroine still too often did not listen to the guy's advice. Even when they arrived in her new territory, the lady was unaware that Orcus's father was originally unable to use his magic on this land. So, if something happens to Seraphie, the Duke's son will not be able to help the girl without her permission. For some reason, only powerful spells worked in this place, while all the others faded away. As evidence, the guy cited his aura, which he materialized for clarity. As soon as Lady Validus became wary, the young man's magic immediately decreased in size. Seraphie had never experienced magic being safely observed by anyone before. Only Orcus revealed the truth to the girl, since he tried not to hide anything from his business partner. For some reason, this land sensed the lady's emotions and protected her when necessary. But the heroine didn't remember such an important moment being described in the original plot. Much of what was connected with Felicia's family was already radically different from the story of the novel. Now, the girl did not see any reason for this family to rebel against the emperor. At the same time, Baron Cadio acted as if he was actually the villain in the world the heroine had entered. All this led Seraphie to the idea that her actions greatly changed the plot as it unfolded. So she had a real chance to save the guy who seemed like a good person. A few days later, young Fionia also had some small adventures. The girl always carefully avoided communication with the emperor's family, but Esther seemed to follow her everywhere. The Duke's daughter was sure that the heir to the throne had come to her brother, but for some reason remained in the living room. It turned out that Ortus didn't want to see his friend training, so he preferred more beautiful views. But the lady was not eager to keep company with a man she considered impudent. No matter how many times Esther tried to get along with this girl, she always ran away from him. While her betrothed openly complimented Luna, who happily accepted them, Esther felt sorry for Fionia, but he had no right to interfere in the affairs of the girl who was his friend's sister. It was at this moment of regret that Orcus appeared in the room, having finished his training. Both children of Duke Felicia were similar in character, as they treated the prince in the same way. The guy behaved this way because he was tired of his friend constantly collecting reports. Esther himself was not happy that his parents forced him to keep a closer eye on his close families. He tried to do everything to prove to Rita that he had no claim to the throne in the future. In fact, Esther was one of those who helped Seraphie during her difficult trial with her father. Unbeknownst to the others, the guy had spoken to his mother beforehand, so she was loyal to the girl. This is one of the reasons why the heroine managed to obtain the title of Duchess, which would have been impossible for others. That's why he demanded from Orcus any information he could bring back to the palace. Of course, Esther still supported his friend, so he didn't tell his parents everything. But he was only too glad to tell them the harmless news that the land of the gods was now empty. Even Felicia's family would take several months to fully develop this territory. Until now, everyone around was surprised by why only Seraphie paid attention to this land. For generations, the Ortus family has searched for the forgotten territory, but no one has ever found it before. But what surprised Astir most was that Orcus suddenly tensed up when the conversation turned to Seraphie. A logical question arose about what kind of person the son of Duke Felicia saw this girl as. Despite popular prejudice, the heroine managed to remain a good and far-sighted person, but only a few knew about the determination and self-confidence that the girl brought into this world. And to Orcus, she reminded him of a cute puppy who was loyal, but remained stupid in some matters. This answer clearly went beyond what the heir thought about Duke Validus's daughter. In his mind, dogs were much more dangerous creatures than Orcus thought. While Felicia meant that the lady was a sweet and funny person by nature, but Esther never managed to understand his friend's train of thought. But he did meet Sweet Looney upon returning home. The guy was not ready to meet the girl who had always attracted him with her beauty. But he was even more surprised that Mars was walking in the company of the young Duchess. Seraphie actively tried to establish relationships with women, so she did not refuse to communicate with them. The heroine remembered this guy as the man who sided with Felicia's family. For this reason, he also suffered a defeat in the plot, as the rebellion was suppressed. Looney showed everyone her joy at meeting Seraphie, whose character she liked. And Esther could not upset the girl by saying that the newly minted Duchess could hardly be trusted. But in fact, the heroine herself was not happy that she had now officially become Validus. That's why the girl surprised everyone around her with her request not to address her by her title. But Seraphi's wishes were not destined to come true, because her status imposed responsibilities on her. This is what Lady Esther explained, who continued to call her Duchess Validus. It wasn't even all this that worried the heroine, but the fact that in this world there were many differences from the original plot. Take, for example, the fact that the heir and Looney communicated well with each other. But in the original novel, Esther was on the side of the Felicia family, which fell at the hands of the emperor, and Looney followed the path of her love, which supported the future ruler in everything. Such a number of discrepancies greatly stressed the girl out, so she couldn't find answers. She understood that some piece of information could well have been missed by the author in the plot, and the feeling of helplessness before fate did not give rest to the lady who wanted to return home. Until then, Seraphi had to pretend that she was quite happy with her current life. People around could not even imagine what kind of drama was happening in the soul of the poor heroine. While it was strange for the lady to try to fit into the noble society that was only in this world, she remembered the basic rule that all aristocrats loved aesthetics and taste. But no matter how closely Seraphi looked, she could not see all the sophistication of the expensive paintings. While Looney was running around the entire exhibition and happily choosing paintings to take home, Mars always liked to acquire something new, and she already had her own collection on the estate. So it was Mars who remembered that the gallery also contained undervalued works. The conversation was about little-known artists who patiently waited for their patrons. Although Esther respected the work of these people, he had no right to help anyone on behalf of the emperor. Of all the company, only Seraphi had the opportunity to support artists without risking themselves. But the lady was not attracted by any of the paintings that were so carefully arranged. Looney and Esther had long since gotten used to the fact that many of their drawings were simply thrown into the trash. But the heroine was sad to realize that without support from above, no artist could survive. It took Looney a long time to notice that Seraphi's face suddenly brightened at the sight of the painting. It turned out that the girl found her talent in a place where she had never planned to look before. But the painting that lay peacefully on the table now attracted the lady's attention to the depths of her soul. As a result, the heroine surprised the butler by buying all the paintings by the unknown artist. The girl didn't see any problem in bringing them in a regular travel suitcase. Seraphi fell so deeply in love with the work of an unknown artist that she decided to support everyone else. Of course, the girl did not take care of the paintings herself, because she had maids, so the lady relied entirely on her assistants, who knew how to handle such things. But the girl's first reaction was mixed, because they had heard about the cost of the paintings. However, Seraphi quickly calmed them down with a lie that these particular jobs weren't worth much. The maids' mood changed rapidly as the Duchess told them about her affairs. They would like Orcus, whom the girls respected with all their hearts, to come visit soon. Even the cooks at the estate tried harder for him, although there was no need for it. The guy amazed everyone around him, not only with his appearance, but also with his amazing manners. That is why the maids considered him an ideal candidate for the role of the Duchess's future husband. But the heroine herself didn't even think of considering her business partner in such a strange light. She couldn't even imagine that the maids had such a wrong opinion about her friend. Seraphi herself did not perceive the son of Duke Felicia as a person she could rely on in the future. That's why she denied all the rumors that she felt good next to the young and handsome Orcus. Soon the lady received a long-awaited guest in the form of a famous artist named Adar. The guy immediately began to tell how glad he was to meet his patron in the form of the Duchess. He hadn't had such luck for a long time, and yet the young man appreciated all his skills. Seraphi never thought that the artist she chose would be so talkative. This man did not stop talking for a minute, which even made the heroine's head hurt a little. What the girl didn't expect was that Adar would somehow know the cost of all the paintings. The guy accidentally let it slip that he had been told about the lady's patronage of others. This meant that someone in the gallery had disrespected the lady's wish to keep a secret. She realized once again that she could only trust those who served her in the estate. So Miss reminded the arrogant artist that she had not yet decided on her ward. But all this time, Adar was sure that the Duchess had already chosen him long ago. He wanted money so much that he didn't consider other options, so he came to the estate himself. But because of this, the heroine began to doubt whether she needed such a talkative person. The only thing that stopped the girl from rejecting the guy was that hair was highly valued in the empire. So any works with such motifs will sell for a lot of money in the future. That is why Seraphi placed so much hope in the work of an artist who was still unknown to anyone. Of course, before signing the contract, the Duchess needed proof of Ader's skills, so she personally supervised his work, since she could not afford to make a mistake in this matter. Even the butler watched with interest as the artist created his next work. Faithful maids ran around the guy to make it easier for him to create incredible beauty, and only Seraphi remained calm and silent throughout the entire time. From the very beginning, the girl suspected that there was something wrong with this artist. As soon as he finished his work, he again began to talk about the patronage of the Duchess. Idar did not expect that Seraphi would suddenly change his mind and kick him out of the estate for a while. The guy was upset by this situation and didn't even understand what the matter was. The heroine did this only because Adar's painting was very different from hers. As a result, the girl couldn't get this strange situation out of her head for a long time. It all got to the point where she missed some of the information that Orcus had so carefully conveyed to her. Only now did the lady notice how handsome and gallant the guy was. But even all his knowledge was unable to help the girl understand the problem now. Although Felicia was always willing to help, there was a limit to his ability in the Empire. That's why Seraphi hid the recent incident even from her close business partner. The heroine was very outraged by the fact that the gallery sent her a completely different artist. She didn't know for sure whether any of the film executives were involved in the incident, or maybe Adar himself lied to everyone around him, just to quickly get influential patronage. None of the aristocrats were allowed to tell about this, so Orcus knew nothing. This guy saw the young Duchess as a completely different person, one that she did not consider herself to be. It was because he would forever remember the expression on Seraphi's face when she fought with her father. Only the heroine was able to boldly look into the face of the Duke, who had mocked her for so long. There was not a drop of fear in the girl's eyes, which was typical for victims of beatings and humiliation. Seraphi herself didn't even pay attention to how she looked to everyone else. She was pleased by the fact that she did not seem like a weak and stupid girl, at least to her partner. Since her rebirth, the heroine has tried to do everything to improve her reputation and status, and only now Orcus confirmed that Seraphi has achieved a lot in just a couple of months. All this time, the heroine forgot that she should pay attention to her achievements. Only the words of people from the outside could bring the girl who was longing to get home to her senses. But she should have remembered that now she could live peacefully in this strange place. Only when a girl comes to terms with her thoughts and desires can she be happy. Although Orcus didn't say much to the lady, he could clearly see how something was gnawing at her inside. This made it even more pleasant for him to see the sincere smile on the young Duchess's face. The guy supported this miss from the very beginning and was not going to change his decision. So for the first time in her life, Seraphi felt warmth spreading throughout her body due to her friend's care. The lady still had to find the artist, whom the owner Indira for some reason hid from her. That is why the next time the heroine came to the gallery, she was in the company of Duke Felicia's son. Miss had no doubt that the presence of such an aristocrat would greatly simplify her search. But the gallery owners still invited Ader Sur, even though Miss no longer trusted this man. But for this case, Seraphi had come up with a cunning plan in advance that no one could stop. Miss personally approached Indira to have him witness her sealed drawing. The heroine remembered well how all the paintings were transferred to people for transportation. So this sketch arrived at her estate with a seal, which the girl did not even open. She needed all these steps in order to catch the artist in his lies in time. After all, the heroine was sure that he would not be able to repeat the picture that was sealed. Adar also understood this perfectly well, which is why he began to refuse additional verification. But Seraphi had no intention of accepting an unknown person under her protection. In this situation, Orcus supported the girl, and she was glad that it was not in vain that she took him with her, so Adar had no choice but to try to prove his skills. As a result, what the artist wrote could indeed be worthy of good praise. But Sur was not the man whose paintings had touched her soul so deeply. As proof, the girl revealed the work that she had kept secret all this time. The gallery owner could not deny the fact that the painting styles of these paintings were different. Of course, the Duchess had no reason to lie about the kind of artist she was looking for, but the girl didn't like the accusations of lying, because Adar defended himself to the very end. She had to resort to quiet anger to quickly calm the angry artist. The lady blamed only the gallery owner's assistant for sending the wrong person to her. But the girl did not admit her mistake, because otherwise she could very well lose her job. This whole situation happened to aristocrats for the first time in their lives. so there were no decisions yet. As the owner of the gallery, Indira was forced to take full responsibility for the mistake. The man was uncomfortable, admitting the fact that such a thing had happened behind his back. Whatever Ader shouted now, none of it mattered to the gallery owner. Now his assistant faced a serious conversation, although she hoped that the deception would not be revealed. Seraphe wasn't going to let people who were trying to deceive her in an important matter go so easily. She knew that Sur was not involved in this matter for nothing, although he tried to play the victim. Suddenly, Indira's assistant burst into tears, because she knew the truth from the very beginning. She wanted to deceive the Lord and the Duchess in the hope that everything would go well. This is all because the lady had been in love with Adar for a long time, but no one wanted to patronize him. That is why Miss decided to take such a difficult step, for which she had to ask forgiveness. As a result, everything went to hell in the life of the assistant, who fell in love with the wrong man. In this situation, Seraphe could not help the lady in any way, although she understood how difficult it was for her. Out of desperation, the girl clung to Adar, for whom she was ready to lose her job. At the last moment, the heroine noticed that the guy did not recognize this lady, although she helped him, so the girl's body acted faster than she had time to realize her movements with her thoughts. The heroine immediately pushed away the artist's assistant, who dared to raise his hand. Adar rolled back several meters from the blow, as he didn't even have time to defend himself. The rage on Seraphi's face frightened him so much that the boy did not dare say another word. More than anything in the world, she hated those who dared to offend weak and helpless people. It is unknown how far the lady would have gone in her anger, but Orcus stopped her from getting into trouble in time. This artist was already punished by his obscurity, so it was enough to send him away. No matter how much Idar extolled himself, reality was cruel and fair to him, so it was no surprise to Seraphi that for many years the aristocrats ignored Sur. Only one poor assistant took his side, simply because she was moved by his feelings. But even this did not teach the young man anything, who considered his skill to be at the highest level. He painted similar pictures so many times that he could repeat any of them with his eyes closed. That's why it was a blow to Ader that his skills were only slightly above mediocrity. The heroine personally saw what true masterpieces of art should look like. When she stood in front of them, something good and pleasant seemed to blossom in her chest. These are exactly the emotions Seraphi experienced when she found an unfinished sketch by an unknown artist. But the reality was that most people never made it into high society, and Adar belonged precisely to this crowd, although he tried to pretend to be a great man. So it came as a surprise to everyone that the heroine decided to patronize Sura. Indira was most surprised by this, because Adar's level was indeed too low. In fact, Seraphi did this only to protect the girl from being beaten. She understood perfectly well that it was on her that the artist would vent his anger and malice. Even the gallery owner had no idea how poorly his faithful assistant had lived all this time. That is why Duchess Validus helped both Idar and the lady who was in love with him. Now the assistant could finally be free from the artist's oppression. Even Indira understood how risky such patronage from the Duchess was. So Seraphi acted wisely when she made several demands of Adar at once. The guy clearly didn't expect that he would now have to somehow miraculously sell his paintings in galleries. Otherwise, the owner will ensure that the patronage agreement is withdrawn. The owner was delighted that the Duchess did not punish the artist in any way. If Seraphi had wanted, this whole story would have quickly spread across the news. But the lady was more pleased to be known as a duchess who understood art. That is why she spent so long looking for the very artist who painted those pictures. The girl was obviously modest and timid, since she did not even dare raise her eyes to Lady Validus. Her name was Via Probi, and while she was painting, she never sought popularity or recognition. The artist always expressed her thoughts on paper in order to ease her soul. In fact, she gave up her pursuit of fame only because of constant condemnation. For some reason, all the aristocrats around thought that Via's paintings lacked tact and dignity. So soon the girl got tired of being repeatedly refused patronage and support. But hope had not completely died out inside Probi, so this time too she tried her best. The artist looked closely at the Duchess's face, trying to read her emotions in advance. But it still came as a surprise to her that Seraphi had taken patronage over her. Via was ready to burst into tears of happiness right there on the spot, because she had always dreamed of something like this. Immediately after this incident, much changed not only in the life of the little-known artist. The young Duchess was at the peak of her popularity. as many people wanted her approval. So soon the heroine was covered from head to toe with letters that came from people. Meanwhile, the girl was only busy with the improvement of the land that the gods had once abandoned. But even the son of Duke Felicia heard about how quickly the young duchess managed to become famous. Seraphy didn't initially expect such a good result, but it worked to her advantage. Now money poured into the Valideus family from all sides, as many wanted to become closer to her. So, if she wanted, the heroine could easily have deposed any family close to the emperor. Luckily for all the aristocrats, the girl didn't have such a plan, because she wanted to return home. The only thing that bothered her was that marriage proposals continued to come. But at that moment, the maid reported that Fionia had completed all the preparations on the territory. So finally, Seraphi and Orcus were able to get out of the carriage to see everything with their own eyes. The heroine did not have high expectations about Felicia's work. Although she wanted to finish everything, she understood from the very beginning that they had taken on the difficult task of improving the land. But the lady was not afraid of difficulties, and so she involved the Duke's daughter, Felicia, in this matter. Fionia was famous for her ability to analyze any land, which she was now helping with. Meanwhile, the heroine admired the beauty of the girl she had been trying to befriend all this time. She couldn't help but notice how similar the brother and sister were in character. When Fionia started working, it was as if the whole world was transformed around her, all because the girl devoted herself completely to magic and was not distracted by anything else. Orcus personally had seen his sister's powers before, so he wasn't surprised by anything. But the heroine never got to observe the actions of Duke Felicia, who quickly finished. So the girl personally saw the difference in magical powers between the father and his daughter. Fionia always tried to be the center of attention to prove that she could do a lot, and Seraphy didn't see anything wrong with that, as the girl looked confident and ambitious. She planned to make this lady a master of the magic tower so that she could return home. Orcus always believed in his sister's powers, but he was surprised that Seraphy also supported her. Previously, the guy had encountered the fact that everyone rejected the very idea of the mistress of the magic tower. But then he met the Duchess, who did not prevent women from becoming leaders. The heroine possessed wisdom beyond her years, so she saw that her brother sincerely loved his sister. Even if they quarrel, Orcus never holds a grudge for long, but is the first to make peace. While they were talking, Fionia was using her magic to compact the earth. Other mages desperately cast protection on the area to prevent the girl's powers from spreading throughout the area. A little more, and their efforts would not have been enough to contain the magic of the great Fionia. But the Duke's daughter quickly found that very crystal, so she no longer used her powers. The girl was glad that her search ended almost in an instant, and now the enormous riches that this land held were revealed to everyone. The heroine suspected that she would soon become even richer, but the money she received exceeded her expectations. This is how the long-term work of extracting magical stones from this land began. The girl tried to keep an eye on everything that was happening to ensure that there were no cases of theft or robbery. The heroine's heart beat faster with joy because she could only dream of something like this before. And now the assistants were quickly extracting stones that promised to bring huge profits. So the look of delight never left Seraphy's face, and she was unable to hide it. Only Orcus did not understand the full depth of the girl's delight as she gradually came to victory. All this would have been impossible if the heroine had not recently won the title from her hated father. And now, nothing could stand in the way of the Duchess, who was engaged in business on her territory. What pleased the lady most was the support from Fionia, with whom she tried to get closer. Until now, the heroine had spoken very carefully with this girl, who had a dangerous character, but Felicia's interest in the land was so high that she didn't plan to cause any trouble. The Duke's daughter had heard many times that this land held many secrets and mysteries. Like a true sorceress, Fionia was eager to solve each of them with Seraphy's permission. That is why she took the first step towards friendship with the young Duchess, who turned out to be smart. And the heroine could not miss this moment, since she had been trying to get closer to Fionia for a long time. More than anything in the world, she dreamed of talking to her about magic, because that way she could return home. It turned out that Felicia loved her powers so much that she would invite anyone to meetings about them, so she didn't make an exception for Seraphi, which proved her loyalty to her. This is how the Duchess caught Fionia, whom she had been afraid to approach all this time, on the hook. The girl's happiness knew no bounds, because now she was one step closer to her original plan. Her eyes shone with joy, revealing all the delight inside the young Duchess Validus. Only Orcus knew that everyone had to be careful at Lady Fionia's meetings. But the sister didn't see anything dangerous in the place where many magicians always gathered. Before Seraphai could even blink, the brother and sister began arguing with each other as usual. But on this land, the girl hoped not to bring discord that would negatively charge the area. Soon, the heroine presented the Empress with a gift in the form of a magic crystal she had found. For this reason, many aristocrats stopped doubting the girl's fidelity. Seraphai was upset to see their hypocrisy, because recently people had not paid attention to her, and now they were ready to pray as if to a goddess. Although Miss had not given them anything, she didn't give away this crystal just like that, because she hoped that she could avoid wars in the future. And then the lady will not have to lose such a good ally in the form of Duke Felicia's son, and perhaps the imperial family will not dictate its terms to everyone around so strongly. This is what the heroine hoped for so much, wishing happiness for everyone in this strange world. Most of all, she was worried about Fionia, with whom the heir would have to cancel the engagement. But, as future changes showed, this would not make Felicia turn away from her friend. But for now, all these events were too illusory for Seraphie to hope for them. It was enough for her that she was able to gain the Empress's favor for a while. Giselle always loved gifts, let alone the world's only magic crystal. However, Seraphie still had to choose her words carefully so as not to offend Her Majesty. A few days later, the Duchess received approval for any work on her property, so the girl only had a few riddles to solve, one of which was the strange feather. This thing had magical properties, as it constantly returned to the young Seraphie. But there was another incident that made the girl think about her future at the Validus estate. Even the assistants did not expect that someone would try to assassinate their Duchess. If it hadn't been for Orcus's warnings, the lady might well have been seriously injured. It turned out that Seraphie had taken possession not only of riches, but also of something that could very well kill her. That's why the girl had so many reasons to think about what to do next. The plot in the original novel could do little to help the heroine, since there were no such events in it. So the girl suffered from powerlessness, because she could not help herself in this situation. No matter how hard the faithful maid Marin tried, her mistress did not get better due to constant stress. Only the paintings of the artist Proby were able to distract the young Duchess even a little. Every time Seraphie came to see Vija, she was horrified by the unpleasant conditions of her life. But the girl had to hide her emotions so as not to upset the artist's little brothers and sisters. If only Validus had received permission from the parents of these children, she would have transported them immediately. Instead, she had to watch as people on Proby constantly argued over trivial matters. Seraphie didn't expect that her parents would send all of Via's money to her older brother's education. The poor artist was forced to keep silent about this so as not to quarrel with her beloved relatives. But the heroine was not one to tolerate such treatment of those she took under her protection. Seraphie was surprised that even in such conditions, Proby managed to draw beautifully. However, the artist herself saw how slowly her work was progressing due to the problems around her. Validus didn't beat around the bush because she came to talk about Proby's parents. She sincerely believed that their behavior was inappropriate, but for some reason, no one objected to them. Even Vaya endured all the humiliation and bullying, despite the fact that she brought money into the house. She did this for the sake of her younger brothers and sisters, because she could not leave them with their parents. Because of her strong love for her loved ones, the artist did not pay attention to their cruel actions. Only now did the heroine realize how wrong she had been when she had given Via a large amount of money. Judging by this girl's living conditions, her parents didn't leave her even a single coin. Proby might have run away from home if it weren't for her little sisters and brothers, who had nowhere to go. Validus sharply posed to the artist the question of what the patronage money was spent on. She wanted to hear the truth about the girl's parents spending everything only on themselves. In the end, the artist had to admit that she had no other choice within the family. Seraphie suspected that commoners might have debts, but not such a huge amount. Even the little children, who lived happily due to their young age, did not know about all this. In this situation, Via blamed herself for deceiving the Duchess and now losing her patronage. But the heroine had a different plan, because she wanted to take Proby with her to the Validus estate. She didn't even think of blaming Via, since she considered only her parents to be to blame for everything. But inside the girl, there were so many fears that she did not think about her own desires. If Seraphi hadn't brought Proby back to her senses, the artist would hardly have moved from her spot. And now she realized that she really could dream a little, because a lot of things were starting to come true. All this time, Via only wanted to create paintings that would touch the souls of most people. But all her life she felt unfair, because her older brother was always busy with his own affairs. And the girl herself couldn't even spend the money she received on education, as she had planned. Proby felt that her loved ones needed care, so she didn't think that she needed it too. After everything she had been through, more than anything in the world, she wanted to run away from home. But she thought about her younger children. At that moment, all the girl's true emotions finally burst out with a loud scream. Seraphi responded with a smile to the strong desire to live that Via was hiding. Validus had originally planned to take the artist with her, so everything worked out well for her. Only now did the heroine understand why the paintings of the unknown lady had attracted her attention so much. From the very beginning, she felt in them a mad desire to escape from the tiresome, cruel reality. That is why these drawings completely captivated Seraphi, who experienced the same feelings. Even if no one could yet understand the meaning of Via's paintings, they were still beautiful. Of course, the little ones heard all the words about their older sister being taken away somewhere. But the lady had no intention of leaving these children in the care of terrible parents. She saw that the children were growing up good and kind, and they could not be allowed to fall into despair. Despite all the difficulties, they tried their best to stick together to protect each other. So the middle sister was ready to earn a living to feed all the younger ones. In response, Seraphi demanded that all the children in the house immediately pack their things for the move. In return, the Duchess wanted these children to fulfill all educational requirements. She intended to raise them to be educated people so that they would not have problems in the future. All children could only dream of escaping poverty and parental injustice. Of course, all the assistants were surprised to see new faces in the Validus estate. But the Duchess's decisions were not discussed, so the children now found a new and good home. Proby still couldn't believe that what was happening was real, because she could only dream of something like this. But she saw with her own eyes that the butler really did care about her brothers and sisters. So the girl had no questions left for Seraphi, who helped her in everything. Via was ready to draw all day and night, just to thank the kind aristocrat. Validus wasn't lying when she said she found solace in the artist's beautiful works. That's why she put so much effort into stabilizing the poor girl's condition. The lady has thought of everything down to the last detail, and her mother will be only too happy to teach the little children. The only thing the Duchess demanded from Proby now was that she no longer communicate with her parents. In fact, Via herself has long been tired of adults taking all her money. This is how a story that began with a small sketch led to the blossoming of an unknown artist. Naturally, the parents could not come to terms with the fact that all their children were taken to the Validus estate. The heroine was ready to fight back against people who were only worried about lost money. To illustrate, she pointed to the bloodstains left by those who tried to enter the territory. No matter what these people told her, the girl did not even think of returning the children to those conditions. In the end, the children went with her without a second thought, which must have told their parents a lot. But the common people refused to accept the fact that they would have to work until the very end. They had survived all their lives thanks to their children's work, but now they no longer had that source of income. Only Seraphi understood this, which is why she so stubbornly defended the poor girls and boys. If necessary, the Duchess was ready to go to court to take away her parenting rights. After a few days, life gradually began to return to its calm course. The children increasingly brought the Duchess beautiful flowers that they had collected on her property. But Seraphi didn't scold them, because she was pleased with such sweet signs of attention. She didn't expect to see that the children would so quickly become a favorite of her faithful maids. The assistant talked about even the smallest achievements of the children around the clock. So soon the heroine decided to personally ask her mother about how the training went. In recent days, Irene has become much better, because she has found a favorite activity. The woman always treated children well, and was only happy to share her knowledge with them. Seraphi could not hide her delight at the fact that all her plans were gradually being successfully implemented. Unfortunately, the status of a duchess imposed many obligations and duties on the young girl. Therefore, she could not devote much time even to her mother, although she had managed to love her. Validus felt better already because Irene was noticeably improving and no longer lost her temper. But the woman did not dare to leave her room, as her fears were great. However, the heroine had to leave the estate for a while, as an invitation arrived from Felicia's family. Her heart beat with joy at the sight of Lady Fionia, who invited Seraphie to talk. This girl always attracted Valaduce with her beauty and gallantry, which were few. So in her next reincarnation, the lady would like to be next to Duke Felicia's daughter. She tried so hard just to talk to Fionia that she couldn't calm down. Excitement took over all the heroine's thoughts so much that she could not think of a topic for conversation. But Felicia felt free while discussing her older brother's behavior and character. She had long noticed that only Seraphie received so much attention and care from Orchis. Like his sister, Fionia was glad that her brother had finally become friends with another girl. At that moment, their conversation was interrupted by Looney, who suddenly appeared and was glad to see everyone. Felicia was surprised to find that Mars and Validus communicated surprisingly well with each other. Looney did not hide the fact that they had recently developed a common cause in art. While the girls were talking, all the other aristocrats gradually arrived for tea, and soon all the seats were taken according to the list, since every lady wanted to be present. Fionia immediately announced that she had arranged this event only for the sake of the young Duchess Validus. But before, Felicia always organized tea parties in honor of her beloved family. Meanwhile, Duke Felicia's son was also having his own little adventures. He was given the responsibility of raising the dog Lala, who was always running away somewhere. She was bought only a few months ago, but the little one quickly charmed the whole family. As a result, even the Duke spent all his free time with the dog, which barked at everyone on his command. Although Lala did not look like a formidable dog, she still faithfully protected her owners. That is why she so easily won the attention of all the people who saw her. Whenever he looked at Lala, Okrisa always seemed to remind him of someone. The dog's restlessness and activity were enviable, but for now, everyone had to run after her. At the same time, the heroine had to fend off the attention of curious aristocrats. Each of them wanted to know how the girl was able to achieve such enormous popularity in such a short period of time. Among all the ladies, only one made the lady freeze in place with curiosity at the sight of her. It was Olin Castan, whose family was no less famous than all those close to the emperor. The heroine was ready to swear that this lady had some significance in the plot, but she couldn't remember what exactly. Even Fionia confirmed the fact that the story of Duchess Validus was amazing and beautiful. What can we say about Looney, who supported everyone she considered her friend? The most pleasant thing for the heroine was to hear words of support from the Duke's daughter, Felicia. It was not without reason that many magicians respected her, assuring everyone around her that she would become the head of the magic tower. This is because Fionia possessed all magical elements except healing. White magic has always been opposed to dark magic, so their union was obviously impossible. Only Seraphie knew that the two bearers of different types of magic would eventually unite. Lily, who only used healing, was supposed to appear in the story soon. Validus waited impatiently for events to begin to pick up speed again, but she didn't expect that some white magician had already managed to stay in the imperial palace. No one in the empire would have allowed this except Lily, so the story had already begun to develop. But what surprised the heroine most was that Fionia had already managed to talk to Lily to check. Seraphie could not even imagine that the prince would turn to his bride to find out the intentions of his future mistress. Only now did she realize how much her actions had influenced the original plot. So there was a chance that Fionia herself would refuse the unpleasant engagement with the heir. While the lady was deep in thought, all the other aristocrats continued to spread rumors. They always enjoyed discussing gossip, and now they had an excuse in the form of Lily with white magic. Seraphie tried desperately to follow the conversations, but the influx of information was too much for her to handle. So in the end, the lady focused on communicating only with Looney, since that was the easiest thing to do. The girl with shining eyes proved to her friend that any person can change over time. The only exception was her father, who constantly spent money on drinking and gambling. As soon as his finances ran out, the man turned to the Duchess's savings. But all of Validus's words about changes in behavior were just lies, so he could continue to spend everything. However, Irene loved her husband so much that she forgave all his mistakes and cruelties every time. As soon as the heroine realized that her father had become a missing person, she decided to go to court. Everyone around still thought that the lady had acted too cruelly towards the Duke. But experience from a past life told Seraphie that it was not worth relying on other people. If only they could change on their own, the Validus family would already be living differently. But the situation with the Duke repeated itself again and again, and the lady could no longer remain silent and look at her. That's why the heroine wasn't afraid to become a villain for her father, just to save herself and her mother. She learned an important lesson about not wasting your life for people who don't love you. As a result, her fiery speech touched the hearts of many aristocrats who loved freedom. The Duchess herself did not expect to cause such a stir, as she was simply sharing her opinion. But every noble lady suddenly decided that she would not waste her life on unworthy trifles. These girls were quickly inspired by the proud examples of their peers, who were building their own lives. Even Fionia was impressed by Seraphi's speech, although she initially supported her decisions. Suddenly, in the midst of this animated conversation, a small dog appeared and attracted attention. Duke Felicia's daughter immediately recognized Lala, even though no one had invited the puppy to the event. Ideally, Orcus should have been watching the dog at this moment, but for some reason, she appeared alone. As soon as Fionia thought about this, her older brother immediately came running to catch the escaped Lala. It turned out that he had completely forgotten about the tea party between the ladies, but the dog had sensed a crowd of people. This is how the guy accidentally ruined his sister's event, because it was only for women. But he got the opportunity to talk to Seraphi, whom he hadn't seen for some time. Orcus was always interested in knowing how the young Duchess Validus was progressing. The heroine herself happily shared with the guy everything that happened in her life during his absence. What impressed the Duke's son most was that his sister looked different for some reason at the tea party. Usually, he didn't pay attention to how beautiful Fionia had grown as she grew up. Seraphi felt awkward, hearing the guy say that he never perceived his sister as a girl. Instead, she wanted to know how long they would continue to play the role of hated rivals in public. All this time, they avoided each other only because they were being followed. But Seraphi was getting tired of having to hide from the Emperor's supporters. The girl would prefer to openly declare to everyone around her that she and Orcus are doing business. But for now, they still had to be wary of all those close to the Emperor. Because of this, the heroine became increasingly filled with hatred for the ruler of the empire every day. Seeing the girl's angry emotions, the guy could hardly hold back a smile, because she seemed cute to him. The more he communicated with Seraphi, the more this lady attracted him with her character and actions. But only recently did the guy decide to officially reveal the fact that they were on friendly terms. There was no point in hiding their communication any longer, because Orcus wanted the heir not to dare touch Seraphi. Until now, the heroine needed the help of the Duke's son, because she knew so little about the hierarchy within the novel. The girl could no longer fully rely on the original plot, which had already begun to differ. She was bothered by the fact that Rita clearly had some kind of secret, so the lady was prying it out of Orcus. But the heroine did not expect that the Emperor's family concealed the murder that was committed by the hands of the heir. If the public finds out about this, Rita's reputation will fall sharply throughout the empire. Only now did the lady understand the reason for the uprising, which, according to the plot, was organized by Felicia's family. Few could come to terms with the fact that a ruling person was capable of cruelty and murder. Heavy thoughts filled Seraphi's mind, as she could not find a way to save herself. Her condition did not escape the attentive Orcus, who always tried to help the girl. So this time, too, he took her out for a shopping spree so they could take their minds off their worries. This is how the heroine found herself among crowded streets, which no longer frightened her with their constant attention. In fact, she had long wanted to look for some kind of gift for the Duke's son as a thank you. Although the guy was a knight by nature, what man could refuse such a severance offer? They didn't come to the cheapest gift shop, but the Duchess still showed miracles of generosity. Thanks to her skillful management of her business, the girl was able to buy a lot of things. Suddenly, at that moment, Lily and the heir, Rita, entered the same store. The guy was clearly trying to charm the girl he met just a few days ago. The heroine was unhappy that such a good day was suddenly ruined for her. Unlike Validus, Felicia was able to keep an expression of indifference on her face. Lily was also very alarmed by this meeting, as she did not expect to see anyone. She had already heard that Orcus's sister was the crown prince's fiancé. But the son of Duke Felicia himself did not think that young Albiolos would become an obstacle to Fionia's marriage. Lily always dreamed of getting to know the girl who wielded dark magic better. Since she lived outside the empire, she had never heard of Validus before. At the moment of the performance, the heroine was suddenly struck by a terrible cough as she was overexcited. None of those present could help the Duchess, who was behaving in an unacceptable manner in society. But now this little thing was the last thing that bothered Seraphi at that moment. Partly, she deliberately kept coughing to check Lily and Retta's reaction. The heroine has long been accustomed to personally verifying to what extent people correspond to the descriptions in the novel. After all, Orcus had long ago proven to the girl that there was nothing in common between him and his character. Besides, she needed to show the prince that she was on good terms with Duke Felicia's son. All this time, the heir thought that Orcus and Seraphi did not interact with each other in any way. And now they were choosing gifts together for mutual friends, which didn't look like the rumors about them. All this made Retu feel a terrible desire to run away, just so as not to give herself away. But it was perfectly clear to the two friends that they had greatly embarrassed the heir to the throne. In the end, Orcus chose a pair for himself to prove to everyone that he treats Seraphi well. The time has finally come for the couple to admit that they have a good relationship with each other. As soon as the prince and Lily walked away, the heroine finally showed her sincere emotions. Felicia completely shared the girl's anxiety, since he did not expect to see those two in the company. It was more like Albiolos felt like a hostage in the imperial palace. But in this situation, no one could help the poor girl who was of interest to the heir. In fact, Seraphi knew in advance how Lily would perceive communication with the prince. That's why she secretly invited the girl to the magic tower, where she always dreamed of going. This proposal was a breath of fresh air for Lily, who didn't know where to escape from Rita. And now, communication with an influential sorceress in the person of Fionia was ensured for young Albiolos. Seraphi cleverly conveyed this message to Felicia along with a gift of earrings. She had so much to do in the near future that the lady barely made it to the opening of her friend's store. So she didn't expect that Count Mars would meet her personally, because it would be a great honor for him. Looney stood modestly behind her father, as he still had a lot of control over her actions. But the heroine's attentive gaze did not reveal any problems in the relatives' communication. On the contrary, father and daughter sincerely loved each other, although the Count overdid it with his care. But Looney always accepted Mr. Mars's support with dignity, and did not take offense at him. Seraphi was pleased to see that at least one father could actually be called by such a nickname. Count Mars was always good-natured, even though he was stubborn in his decisions. It was only because of this trait of his that Looney was periodically embarrassed by her father, who did not watch his words. But the joy of her friend coming to the opening of her store quickly replaced all other emotions. As soon as they entered inside, Mars's face quickly changed, because she loved every single thing here. Seraphi immediately realized that this girl had good taste in things, even if her father didn't support her. More than anything in the world, Looney was delighted with the modest praise from Duchess Validus. The lady had always dreamed of opening her own store, but until now she had never had the opportunity. And now, after so many years, the girl's dream has finally come true, although not without difficulties. So the kind words from Seraphi, whom she respected, were so important to the Count's daughter. Looney was used to the fact that many in her family hindered the development of her business because they did not believe in her. As soon as some kind of trouble happened, relatives began to dissuade the lady from going to the store. So Mars soon began to feel like she had been raised only to have a successful marriage. It was only by a miracle that the girl was able to insist on achieving her dream. And now, Looney had an important matter for Seraphi, because her store was in danger of being set on fire. The heroine had already heard that some places were being attacked by arsonists, but she did not want to interfere. And in the end, she accidentally found herself drawn into the plan of two friends who were going to catch the offenders. In fact, Seraphi would have preferred to stay at home, but it was as if someone had asked her opinion, so she had to take part in a secret plan for the girl who hoped for luck. In the Duchess's opinion, Looney and Fionia were acting too relaxed for their tasks, but the heroine was in no hurry to bring the girls to their senses, because their mood was partly useful. In fact, Felicia was only fooling around to make Mars feel more at ease. But as soon as Seraphi started talking about business, Fionia also immediately became more serious. A quick analysis helped the Duchess realize that arsonists would indeed come to this place. She was sure that these people would want to prevent the Mars family from opening their store. And soon, unknown men actually appeared nearby, carefully hiding their faces. They were fully prepared for another fire, which they had started before. But this time, the girls were fully armed, because they planned to put an end to the arsonists, Fionia's magic was so powerful that no mage could handle it. What can we say about ordinary people who did not possess any powers at all? The girls left no chance for the arsonists who were harming the people around them to escape. As they fled, the cloaks fell from the boys' faces, and Looney recognized them as her family's servants. The lady always suspected that her relatives would continue to interfere with the fulfillment of her dream, but now she was finally sure that no one could be trusted. The girl was completely overcome with anger because she trusted her loved ones until the very end, and they betrayed her. If before there had been at least a drop of hope left in her, now Looney had put all feelings aside. It turned out that Looney was unable to remain sad for long, because in a second, she was already ready for revenge. It was not for nothing that Mars bore such a surname, because there was more militancy in her than femininity. Fionia was always on Luna's side, no matter what plan the girl chose for herself. Felicia only had questions for Seraphis, since she had heard about her activities behind her back. The whole point was that the heroine advised Lily to train the Duke's daughter. But Validus had another surprise for Fionia, because she started dating her brother. This news came as such a surprise to Felicia that her cry of joy spread throughout the area. A few hours later, Looney visited her parents, who pretended not to know anything. The girl used all her acting skills to blame her relatives for the trouble. She had to lie that she and Fionia and Seraphi were just walking near the store. Suddenly, the girls decided to take from him the registration book that Looney had left that day. There was no sign of trouble, as there were no other people in the empty building. And everything would have been fine, if not for the appearance of arsonists on the store premises. The heroine personally stated that they almost burned alive at the hands of unpleasant enemies. Even if Mars's parents had planned to set the store on fire, they did not want to kill their daughter. Fionia had a plan from the start to identify her enemies, as she possessed extensive knowledge. So, as soon as all the inhabitants of the estate gathered in front of her, the lady sprayed one pesticide. Felicia knew that if this product came into contact with residual heat, it would definitely leave a rash. So soon she discovered those same spots on the body of her friend's older brother. This terrible news quickly spread throughout the estate, because this was unacceptable. Other relatives did not feel any pity for the guy who was so easily caught setting the fire. The young man had no choice but to accept responsibility for the attempted arson. Count Mars's face showed how ashamed he was of his son's poor upbringing. From the very beginning, the heroine felt that something was wrong in the family because no one was worried about Looney's health. But the girl almost got hurt in the fire, although she was able to successfully prevent it. This family's behavior was the last straw for the lady, so she pushed her father away. If before Looney still somehow trusted her loved ones, now she saw with her own eyes that they did not love her. That's why she threw a loud tantrum right in the middle of the estate, which she now disliked. Anyone who didn't know this girl well might have decided that she was truly heartbroken by betrayal. But Seraphi was in no hurry to believe that Lady Mars was grieving over the loss of her unloved family. She knew that in reality, Looney was just masterfully playing at suffering and pain. All this was done in order to revise the business agreement in the father's name. So the heroine quickly supported her friend, who wanted to take over the business. Count Mars found himself in a situation where he had to make amends for the actions of his loved ones. The man was not mentally prepared for his defeat to come so quickly, but at that moment, the heroine did not spare anyone from this family, because her friends almost got hurt. Meanwhile, the Countess tried to stop her daughter, who had already managed to collect all her things. The mother sincerely loved Looney, so she didn't know about many of the pranks of her husband and sons. But it was the older brothers who were behind the attempted brutal arson of their younger sister's store. It was no secret to Looney that everyone in her family was against her business, because she was a girl. That is why the rage inside the girl did not allow her to even look back at her loved ones before leaving. Who would have thought that Looney would end up choosing the Validus family estate as her home? The heroine didn't waste her nerves on objecting, since she was hardly ever at home anyway. What surprised her even more was that Fionia began to visit the estate more often for Luna's sake. Before Seraphi could blink, her home became a secret hideout for her friends. Lady Mars was enthusiastic about developing a business outside of her family name. The girl had thought in advance that she would be sponsored by Validus, but no one asked the heroine her opinion. When Looney made a decision, few people were able to argue with her about it. The only question that remained was whether Lady Mars would truly be okay after what she had been through. The girl had already made plans, which included not only Seraphi, but also her fiancé Iris. However, the heroine didn't have time to be indignant, as Looney suddenly pulled out white feathers from somewhere. The Duchess had encountered them before, but was unable to unravel the meaning of this discovery. There were more and more feathers in her life, but the lady still couldn't find an answer to what they were needed for. As a result, the girl had to turn to the wise son of Duke Felicia for help. It was clear from the guy's face that he was no less confused than the aristocrats at the sight of the feathers. Before, Seraphi didn't attach any importance to them, so she didn't tell the guy anything. But now even the usually calm Fionia became interested in this unusual case. Magical analysis of the feathers yielded no results, as they were adapted for writing. Even when Felicia burned several of them, nothing unusual happened to the feathers. The only difference this time was that the third prince was also watching everything that was happening. No matter how much Akris chased this guy away, Esther still returned back with curiosity. In this way, he reminded the Duke's son of his little dog, which also always stuck to other people. But Lala didn't know how to cause big problems for anyone, which couldn't be said about the heir. When the dog was little, she played happily with feathers, as if they were the best toy in the world. This visibly amused Esther, who was constantly hanging around the cute puppy. In fact, the guy was wondering if Seraphi would really now turn against the Mars family. But all this time, he did not dare to move on to the main question, so he asked the lady only now. The heroine understood perfectly well how dangerous her decision to fight could be. She didn't think that Count Mars would complain to the imperial family so quickly for his own protection. So now, Esther was wary of the girl he had never trusted. But the lady could not lose contact with the prince, who was always on the side of Felicia's family. She still received unpleasant letters from the annoying Baron Catio, to whom she did not answer. And many aristocrats brought trouble to the Duchess, since they supported the Emperor in everything. But in the background, the Mars family's attempts to burn down the store were just harmless jokes. So Seraphi had no intention of openly feuding with the family that was on the Emperor's side. She immediately explained to Esther that she was not that stupid, and that there had clearly been some misunderstanding. This gave some comfort to the boy, who could not protect Validus, although he wanted to help her. Suddenly, a sharp cry from a frightened Luna interrupted the peaceful conversations of friends on the estate grounds. Orcus took this as a threat, so he immediately found himself next to the girl he liked. But it turned out that the whole thing was just that the feathers suddenly began to move in an incomprehensible way. No one would have thought that an ordinary thing could do something like this. Fionia tested the feathers for magic several times, but so far it has yielded no results. An interesting guess pierced the heroine's consciousness, so she rushed to the experimental pit. Felicia had blown up the feathers in this place a few minutes ago, but there was no trace of them left. Although Orcus began to communicate with Seraphi more often, he still could not understand her train of thought. But most of all, the young man was embarrassed by the fact that the lady affectionately called him in front of other people. The Duke's son never got used to the fact that they played the role of lovers for the whole society. As a result, by the end of the day, the lady was so exhausted that she was not happy about the arrival of Count Mars. It was clear from the girl's face that she was not thrilled about talking to this man. If only the Duchess could, she would immediately throw this man out of the estate. But the Count was persistent, as he was worried about the future of his family after his daughter's escape. It wasn't hard for Seraphi to guess that the man wouldn't leave her estate without the contents of the agreement. He remembered well that after the recent gift, the Empress supported the Duchess in everything, while Rita gave instructions to the Count to stay on his side and keep an eye on Seraphi. That's why Mars was so worried that the change in the treaty might mean the end for him. Imagine his surprise when the content of the business rules did not change at all. The man could not even imagine that the Duchess would not make his life worse in any way. For now, the girl followed a peaceful path so as not to attract the prince's attention in advance. So she changed almost nothing in the contract, except for a small amendment. But the Count did not immediately notice this point, and therefore decided that the danger for him had passed. However, when Seraphi pointed out the changes to him, a cold sweat broke out in the man from anxiety. The whole point was that Validus handed over all management of the business to Felicia's family. The Count had heard well of how carefully this family always conducted its affairs. This is how the heroine dealt with the cunning man who had previously caused her trouble. Literally, the next morning, the Validus estate was finally visited by the knight Carl Iris. Looney greeted her lover, whom she had missed for so long, with a joyful smile. The guy himself was pleased with this meeting, since he couldn't come earlier due to business. The feeling of gratitude towards the Duchess only increased within him after Lady Mars's help. In fact, Seraphy helped Looney not for the sake of the night, because she already considered the girl a friend. But if it weren't for Carl and his help, the lady would hardly have been able to stay alive in this world. So she watched with a sweet smile on her face as the lovers admired each other. After everything that happened, Iris was filled with even greater respect for the wise Duchess. So the guy was not against swearing allegiance to the girl, who greatly helped his beloved. Not all ladies were given such an honor, so the heroine was pleasantly surprised. She was only too happy to recruit loyal friends who could help her in the future. Moreover, not a drop of jealousy awoke in Looney, although her boyfriend communicated well with his friend. Just in case, Seraphy still reminded that she only feels love for Orcus, but it turned out that everyone around her knew that her relationship with Felicia was just a show for the public. So Carl wasn't interested in their communication, because he was only interested in knowing about Looney's affairs. Previously, the heroine could only dream of having friends who would support her unconditionally. But at that moment, the maid ran into the room in panic, because something terrible had happened. The lady was not prepared for something to happen to her mother, who did not leave the room. All other thoughts immediately flew out of the girl's head, because she sincerely loved Irene. The children were no less worried than the adults about what happened to their favorite teacher. It turned out that the woman attempted to leave the room, but fear overwhelmed her. The panic attack hit Madame so hard that she immediately took to her bed. None of her words could console the little ones, who continued to cry bitterly near the teacher. The heroine still considered herself guilty of what happened to her mother after her father left. If only Seraphy had taken up the issue of the Duke's excommunication earlier, then Irene would have been better off. But the mother didn't even think of blaming her daughter for being late in her actions, because all this time she herself had done nothing. Seraphy's support was so important to her, but all this time Irene hid her condition. She loved her daughter with all her heart, but she could not cope with the psychological trauma from her husband. More than anything in the world, the woman dreamed of leaving this place, but she didn't even step outside. The heroine understood perfectly well that any radical changes would take time. In her mother's eyes, she saw a desire for a good life outside the boring estate, and the girl was able to help Irene, but only when she herself was ready for it. For this reason, she came up with the idea of expanding her territory in order to move her mother to another place. The girl believed that nothing was impossible for her, because knowledge of the plot would help her. Besides, the lady still had good helpers in the form of Carl and Looney, who were ready to support her. Only the knight had some doubts about whether Validus would be able to cope with all the tasks. The lady always looked as if no problem could break her will. But Lady Mars was ready to support even the most disastrous idea from the Duchess. Iris could only envy such blind faith in her friend, because it was harder for him to trust. But the guy was pleased to see how quickly Seraphy was developing in all her directions. He finally decided for himself that contacting Duchess Validus was the right choice. But once upon a time, the guy didn't really know which side he should take as support. But the joy on Looney's face told the knight that he would never regret his decision. For the first time in a long time, the girl was so happy, because she felt complete freedom of action. Previously, the father always limited his daughter's desires, although he did this out of concern for her. But now, Looney herself made decisions about how to act in a given situation. So she was already looking forward to her wedding with Carl, for which she still had to prepare. Meanwhile, events were happening in Felicia's family as the mother came to talk to her son. Orcus had already heard that Letitia was planning to divorce his father due to dissatisfaction, but the guy was not the kind of person who gave advice to noble ladies in solving their problems. The woman was already quite fed up with the fact that her husband did nothing but talk about Duchess Validus. She didn't deny the fact that Seraphy was worthy of discussion, but not in such quantity. Instead, Letitia preferred to discuss Fionia's appearance, which had grown her hair out considerably. But the Duke was against the girl cutting her hair, since he himself had grown it long in his youth. Even Orcus could not support his mother in her desire to slightly change his sister's appearance. Madame sometimes had such unexpected motives to do something strange in her life, but the boy always felt care and support from his mother, so he was ready to forgive her a lot. If it weren't for Letitia's upbringing, Orcus would hardly have grown up so kind and intelligent. But the young man didn't expect that the madam would suddenly cut off her hair instead of her daughter's. He thought that he had long since gotten used to her strange antics. But the woman amazed her son again. The woman learned from the other aristocrats that her son was dating Seraphi. But she remembered well Orcus's recent conversation with Baron Cadio, who wanted to marry the lady. This guy didn't see any obstacles for himself, although the girl's heart had been taken for a long time. So Duke Felicia's son had to personally talk to the aristocrat to get him to leave him alone. All this did not escape Letitia, who knew about all the affairs on the estate. Personally, she was looking forward to the fall of the Cadio family, whose sources were beginning to dry up. Orcus was not nearly as bloodthirsty as his mother, as he tried to treat everyone well, but the woman always told her son that his kindness could become unnecessary on the path to greatness. But the young man still had a poor understanding of what his mother was periodically striving for. Although he had been raised by her all his life, Letitia's thoughts remained a mystery to Orcus. But the madam was sure that her son grew up to be as handsome as she herself was in her youth. The woman didn't need more, because in terms of governance, she was still even better than her husband. So Letitia was not afraid to discuss important issues regarding the development of their family with her son. Now Orcus knew that his mother was worried about the recent rumors about the appearance of a white mage. What alarmed him most was the prince's interest in Lily, who tried to distance herself from him. Unfortunately for those around her, the Empress did not react in any way to the heir's attempts to get closer to the lady. She only patronized Seraphi, so she didn't pay attention to other things. So Madame should have personally prevented Rita from getting close to another girl. Of course, Orcus also didn't want his sister to end up without a good groom. Meanwhile, Lily finally had an audience with the Empress, whom she was very afraid of. But the anticipation of meeting the powerful Fionia completely took over the girl. Moreover, Seraphi provided good support to the lady who was the only one who possessed white magic. The heroine knew that this lady would be able to provide her with invaluable assistance once she had upgraded her skills. That's why she made a deal with Giselle to at least consider Lily as a sorceress. But the girl's nervousness gave her away, as she was not accustomed to such formal receptions. The last thing the lady expected was that the emperor's wife would immediately demand that she demonstrate her abilities. Panic gripped Lily at the sight of the blood she couldn't yet heal. So Albiolus could only beg for forgiveness, as she needed time to practice. The maid who cut herself to test herself was particularly unhappy with what was happening, but in fact, the Empress did not harbor any grudge against the girl, as she knew about her weak abilities. All this was planned just for the sake of finally bringing the lady to the magic tower. Before meeting Felicia, Lily was even more nervous than during her conversation with the Empress. Fionia herself retained the calm and wisdom that had been well developed in her since birth. But she didn't expect Albilos to immediately rush into her arms, as she needed support. Surprisingly, Felicia did not feel disgusted by the girl her fiancé had noticed. Lily quickly charmed Fionia with her spontaneity and sincerity, although she herself did not know it. The Duke's daughter always treated people well, as demonstrated by her honest emotions. It turned out that Lily was a big fan of the books that Fionia published on magic. That was why Albiolos's whole body trembled with excitement at the sight of a real dark sorceress. Felicia enjoyed the amount of attention, although she usually tried to stay out of it. But for some reason, Fionia was drawn to this girl so strongly, as if they had known each other for a long time. Lily's respect and passion for Lady Felicia was so great that she desperately wanted an autograph. So pretty soon, Fionia was convinced that Albilos was safe for her. There were also some interesting events in the life of the heroine, who could not live a single day in peace. So, she soon learned that a cat had wandered onto her estate, lured by small children with food. Her presence was unnoticed by the others, as Looney encouraged this cute animal in every possible way. More often than not, the girl preferred walks to the difficult training that Seraphi prepared for her. Although Lady Mars had all the makings to lead her family, she was never interested in it. The heroine did not expect that Looney planned to continue to stay by her side to help her with her business. Lady Mars found in the Duchess a man who was ready to support her in any situation. But many simply avoided the girl because of her excessive persistence and activity. So it was a joy for Luna when she realized that Seraphi had no disdain for her. That's why she wanted to continue helping the heroine, who commanded her respect in everything. But it still came as a surprise to Luna that the Duchess took her on so easily. They went on this trip to look at an abandoned mansion and buy it. Seraphie didn't expect that this place would become so overgrown due to the absence of a human hand. But what surprised the girl even more was that Looney began to calmly cut her way through, which she had learned from Carl. As soon as they reached the entrance, the doors themselves fell down in front of them from old age, although the ladies had barely touched them. Despite this, none of the girls even thought of despairing, because they still had a lot of work to do. Although it was unusual for the aristocrats to clean themselves, they tried their best. But in the end, Looney still gave in first due to the fatigue that overwhelmed her. Only at this moment did Seraphie allow herself to rest, as she usually worked until her last breath. But in their heads, the girls were still thinking up a plan for developing their joint business. It wasn't just that they came to such a beautiful place with the desire to improve it to perfection. The ladies planned to transform this abandoned mansion into one of the most popular holiday hotels in the empire. Of course, this would require a lot of effort, but the surrounding area was ideal for it. So even the heroine was carried away by a stream of inspiration, although she usually did not waste her time on such things. The girl did a great job when she drew a duck that everyone would ride on around the lake. She was only slightly offended when Lady Mars did not appreciate her artistic skills. Looney herself was only worried that they might not have enough of the planned budget to develop the business. But the heroine didn't see any problem with this, since she had more than enough money. So the Duchess was ready to invest even more in this matter than they had originally planned. But Looney feared that such a decision could make their business extremely unreliable and unstable. Before, the heroine had not thought about the fact that she should not rely only on huge resources all the time. But Orcus once hinted to the girl that she might not see beyond her own nose. And now Lady Mars has finally opened Validus's eyes to the proper way of doing things. That's why the heroine, without hesitation, promoted this girl to the role of her secretary. Luna's happiness knew no bounds, because she was even afraid to imagine such a quick promotion. But the girl was still ready to faithfully serve the Duchess, who had proven her skill to her. Everything would have been fine if at that moment Seraphie had not felt a sudden weakness throughout her body. The result was that Luna's face gradually began to blur before her eyes due to loss of consciousness. Only after some time did the Duchess slowly begin to recover from her fainting spell. Looney's worried face slowly emerged from the fog that had been clouding Seraphie's eyes the whole time. The heroine would have given a lot to not find herself in such a painful and weak situation. She didn't really like to attract attention to herself, but now she accidentally found herself at the center of troubles. The girls weren't able to talk together for long, because someone wanted to visit Validus. It turned out to be Orcus, who arrived as quickly as he could, because he was worried about the condition of his friend. In front of him, the lady began to put on even more courage so that the guy would not worry about her so much. Miss used the right tactics with cute nicknames, which greatly embarrassed the Duke's son. But the heroine had no problem behaving this way, since she was amused by her friend's reactions. Orcus didn't feel embarrassed for long, because he had brought important documents for Looney's registration. The girl was only outraged by the fact that the young man deducted all his expenses from her salary. Her indignation knew no bounds. But now, no one cared about the anger of the girl who had been officially registered. The heroine was much more worried about the fact that she was sent an invitation to join the council. It wasn't hard for Seraphie to guess that this would cause her a huge amount of problems. At that very moment, Orcus delighted the lady by telling her that the Empress had already included her in the council. The last straw for the girl's patience was that she would also have to pay an annual participation fee. Validus's only consolation was that Orcus's father was also on the council, meaning she had an assistant at this event. What surprised Miss most was that Reth's heir was also a member of this assembly. As soon as her friends left, fatigue immediately gripped the girl's hands and feet again. She was afraid that the uprising would not be far off, since all the events were leading precisely to this. So Seraphie will have to put in a lot of effort to ensure that peace continues to reign in the Empire. She began the transformation with her loved ones, as Looney quickly justified her trust in her work. So soon, that abandoned mansion was shining as if people had never left it in its life. And the long-awaited day of Mother Seraphie's departure arrived, and her fears did not diminish even a little. The heroine understood all her mother's feelings perfectly, so she was ready to support her physically. But the girl's strength was not quite enough to pull Irene out of the room, so they fell together. Eventually, the woman's eyes finally opened, because there was nothing scary about her leaving the room, and she locked herself inside for so many years, only because of the cruel words of her husband, whom she always loved. But now everything was different, because Madame had new goals in life that she had not even suspected. The daughter took care of this, since from the very beginning, she was thinking about how to save her mother from this captivity. So together, they could easily overcome any obstacles that would stand in their way in the future. The lady was ready to help Irene throughout her life to make her future existence easier. The Duchess did not console herself with the hope that they would easily overcome all the problems. After all, the mother also had to go beyond the estate, and that was a completely different story. She didn't expect the woman to immediately notice the excitement that the girl was trying to hide. Madame always had wisdom, but was too weak to act on her own. And now her daughter's support had a very positive effect on her, so Irene was not afraid. That is why she took such a bold step outside the estate, although it had not been easy for her before. As soon as the woman found herself on the street, she felt freedom rushing into her from all sides. The heroine watched in amazement as all her mother's fears retreated, as if they had never been there. For the first time in a long time, Irene felt as if there was nothing bad in her life. There was a touch of sadness, even in such a happy moment, because the children loved their teacher. The woman herself did not want to leave them, but she no longer had any other choice, so she allowed the kids to write her letters whenever they wanted, so they could stay in touch. Meanwhile, Orcus brought the knights of the House of Felicia with him to deliver Aaron to the place. The guy was still embarrassed when it came to the fact that he and Seraphi were in a relationship. Only the lady calmly played out the emotions of love, although her performance did not closely resemble the truth. Only true lovers realized that Seraphi and Orcus were only pretending to be a couple. But Irene quickly believed the lie, which was a balm for her aching heart. Of course, the heroine couldn't let her mother go without protection, so she gave her the magic stones. In addition, the lady gave her mother her necklace, so that Madame would always feel her presence nearby. Irene's happiness knew no bounds, because she had no idea that she had raised such a good daughter. If it weren't for Seraphi's help, the woman would have continued to hide from everything in her room. And in the end, she could happily respond to the hugs of her daughter, who had done so much for her. No matter how sad the children were about the separation, they were still happy for the teacher. So Irene was able to calmly leave the estate, which had become hateful to her. The heroine saw that a new stage of a good and bright life had finally begun in the woman's life. She put so much effort into this that she herself did not believe that what was happening was real. Only Orcus's support sobered up the girl, who liked to devalue her achievements. The Duchess was used to most of her plans being disrupted, so she always remained collected. But she didn't expect the guy to suddenly call her Sira, which meant a close level of trust. Although the heroine herself insisted on nicknames, her short name confused the lady to the point of madness. Luckily for the girl, Orcus did not laugh at her for long, because he was glad of her moral peace. The guy was sure that now everything would be fine in Irene's life, because they had put in a lot of effort. Seeing his calm face, the Duchess herself calmed down, despite the thoughts in her head. But it was impossible to think about worries endlessly, since it was necessary to relax at least a little. And the company of such a handsome guy greatly helped Seraphi, who usually didn't know how to relax. The very next day, things did not take long to happen, and the lady accepted the invitation from Aulin Castan. This girl wanted to talk to Validus so much that she called her long before the others arrived. She wasn't bothered by Looney's presence, because Ulian believed that both girls could be trusted. Recently, someone was constantly following Castaigne, and the miss was very scared because of this. But only to the Duchess did she tell everything about how terrible things had been for her lately. It all started with an innocent marriage proposal, which the lady rejected without hesitation. But immediately after the first letter, a second one followed, and then all the others began to arrive. In despair, Olin, on the advice of her parents, burned all the letters and flowers, not wanting to deal with them. But one day, when Castaigne was peacefully walking down the street, everything changed dramatically in her life, because an unknown guy personally found the girl to give her a bouquet and a proposal. It turned out to be Count Baglos, with whom Ulan wanted nothing to do, let alone marry. The heroine remembered well that this man was also close to the heir. Like Baron Catio, Seraphi was greatly disturbed by the fact that two men from the prince's side were already trying to marry the ladies. What confused the girl most was that the Baglos family was very rich and famous in the empire, so it was not so easy to get rid of his representatives if they decided something for themselves. The heroine was seriously scared when she heard that the guy continued to pursue the girl. It was necessary to make it clear to him as soon as possible that Olin would never accept his offer. It turned out that Castaigne had already told Baglos about this, but he seemed not to listen to her. That is why the lady found herself in such a hopeless situation, constantly fearing for her life. No matter how many times she burned the boy's flowers and letters, they only grew in number. And in the end, everything came to the point that Baglos went from mercy to anger, promising to deal with the lady. So the horror only gripped Ulan more, and she could hardly bring herself to tell everything. Serafia immediately provided support to Castana, who was destined for a sad fate in history. That's why the heroine couldn't turn away from the girl, even though it would be difficult to help her in her situation. She remembered that the original plot involved aristocrats being tried for harassing ladies. Then Olin did suffer, and her terrible fate forever remained an example for everyone else. For some reason, the prince remained inactive until the very end, although his confidants continued to lie. So the Duchess had to keep a close watch on the actions of these people. In the novel, none of the heir's assistants were ever punished, because Rita stood up for them. Seraphi was never able to find out whether the prince was aware of what his confidants had done. Despite everything, the lady planned to save Castaigne, and at the same time protect herself from the aristocrats. She remembered that problems would also begin with Looney's trading store, which would be betrayed by her own father. And only Duke Felicia will speak out in defense of the girls, but his loss will lead to an uprising. Before the council meeting, the heroine had to remain inactive, as there was too little information. Orcus met her in front of the main building, as his father was already inside. Looney couldn't help but giggle mischievously at the sight of the boy playing the role of a lover. This time, the young man became a little bolder, since it was normal for couples to give each other kisses. So it was Seraphi who was embarrassed by the actions of her friend, who suddenly became better at pretending. Orcus himself did not think that he had inadvertently invaded the personal boundaries of the Duchess, whom he actually liked. Over the past few days, he had thought a lot about how they both should behave in society. He had already come up with a plan, according to which he would temporarily accompany Looney to the council. But the heroine had to talk to the heir to appease his attitude a little. Seraphi couldn't even imagine that she would be faced with so many difficult tasks at the council at once. But the girl came here with the understanding that she would not be able to do without difficulties and dangers. She was somewhat comforted by the fact that Duke Felicia always remained on the side of the Validus family. So the first thing she did was go to this man because she needed support. Seraphi would have preferred to attract as little attention as possible, as she knew little about the council. But the Duke did not allow the lady to remain aside, because there were many who wanted to talk to her. And so, in a matter of seconds, a huge number of aristocrats swarmed around the lady for whom they had respect. But the most important thing for the Duchess was her acquaintance with the influential and wealthy Madame Kia. The girl couldn't even imagine that Duke Felicia would try so hard to raise her status. Despite her surprise, the lady did not forget her manners and greeted the old woman in time. But Kia still noted with disdain that the young Lady Validus was too young. Anxiety washed over the heroine, but the Duke believed that she had already managed to please the noble lady. Felicia knew all the people around him well, so he easily recognized all their emotions. The meeting was about to start, so everyone hurried to take their seats. The Duke kindly reassured Seraphi that she wouldn't even have to say anything at the first council. But the Duchess was afraid until the very end that she would not fit into the company of famous aristocrats. But their general arguments were so different from what the lady had come up with that her fear quickly left her. For some reason, none of the aristocrats could fully listen to the other, which led to shouting. But the girl needed to somehow understand what manner of action to choose for this place. But in such a terrible noise, it was hardly possible to insert even a word that would be heard. However, this did not bother Duke Felicia, who confidently advocated for the imposition of punishment for persecution. As Seraphi expected, the prince immediately rose to the opposition under the pretext that the matter needed to be examined. But what scared the lady most was that Rita wanted to introduce a law on the reconstruction of buildings. Miss understood perfectly well that then many commoners would be cruelly driven out of their homes. The Duke had a plan for this eventuality, as he wanted to provide financial assistance to those who would be left homeless. In her emotions, the heroine accidentally left her place, as she was overwhelmed by thoughts about people. And this did not go unnoticed by the prince's close associates, who always kept an eye on the Duchess. Baron Cadio was the first to express his outrage at the situation, hoping that Seraphie would feel guilty. But as soon as the heroine recognized this man, contempt appeared on her beautiful face. The man clearly didn't expect that the young girl wouldn't be at all embarrassed by his performance. Moreover, he suddenly felt that he had accidentally put himself in danger with his loud shouts. Seraphie had to work hard not to show his emotions in front of this unpleasant man. But she understood that it was impossible to enter into an argument with the heir to the throne's confidant now. Rita watched the girl's every step very carefully, which aroused his suspicions, and only the support of Duke Felicia saved the lady from the prince's active actions. The aristocrats immediately noticed that Orcus's father really did treat the young duchess well. But now was not the time to discuss other people's love stories, so everyone returned to the meeting. In the end, Seraphie remained near Duke Felicia to take a direct part in the discussions, but she was constantly irritated by the prince's angry gaze, even though he directed it at his assistants. Meanwhile, Orcus's father returned to the main discussions, and people gradually calmed down. The most terrible thing was that the prince was ready to send all the commoners to the outskirts of the empire. All the aristocrats knew how unsafe that area was, but the heir's close associates immediately supported his idea, no matter how crazy it seemed. Each of them began to shout in defense of Rita, since their reputation depended on it. The heroine was horrified by how stupid the plot twists were that the author of this novel came up with. Now, looking at the emperor's son, she would never call him the main hero of this story. Miss suddenly remembered that it was Lady Olen's injury that had led to the protection law being passed. The girl locked herself away forever in her parents' estate, but at that moment, no one cared about her anymore. Instead, the real trial finally began, since it had been unprofitable for Rita to raise this issue before. But, immediately after the attack on Caston, the heir began desperately looking for those to blame for this story. He did all this only in order to clear his own reputation in front of the emperor. Meanwhile, Baron Cadio stubbornly tried to provoke the heroine into rudeness. The man had to try hard before the lady shut his dirty mouth with one blow. Seraphie hated it when someone so brazenly encroached on her identity, so she could not sit silently. Her friends had no doubt that the Duchess would be able to defend herself in this situation, so even Duke Felicia did not think any worse of Validus, who had crossed the line after Baron Cadio. The heroine's verbal attack turned out to be many times more powerful than the man's pathetic attempts to irritate her, so the aristocrat could only look up pitifully at the girl who had greatly frightened him. Duke Felicia burst out laughing with delight at the sight of this, because she always loved girls with complex characters. Meanwhile, the lady was not going to shut up, because she had something to say to all these unpleasant people. When the girl was invited to the council, no one expected that she would dare to express her opinion. And in the end, Seraphie even demanded that an investigation be conducted into the aristocrats' fraud. The Duchess was genuinely amused by the reaction of the noble people, who were afraid that they would not pass the test. It was clear from their faces that they were not prepared to confront the young girl from the Validus family. Only the sudden words of the heir stopped the girl from continuing to humiliate everyone. The heroine herself understood that she had crossed the line, but she was unable to remain silent because of the injustice. While Rita believed that the temple should take proper care of the common people, he believed that it would not be a big deal if a few poor people could not cope with the resettlement. But the girl believed that all these people were the same citizens of the empire as the rich. In the end, the lady had to turn to the advisor of their discussions, who possessed wisdom. Only he could judge people who had clearly done wrong and were desperately hiding it. That is why the heroine continued to demand justice, although this was her first meeting. Personally, she was always ready to take responsibility for the fact that she belonged to the upper classes of society. But the girl saw resistance in the faces of many aristocrats, because they were afraid to admit their mistakes. Because of injustice, the lady died in the past, but she was not guilty of anything at that moment. But fate decreed otherwise, as there remained many cruel people in the empire. This is precisely what the girl, who experienced injustice firsthand, actively tried to fight. She didn't yet know that all her words would bring no results, because the prince would remain stubborn. As a result, by the end of the meeting, the girl was left squeezed out like a lemon due to extreme fatigue. Orkis and Looney supported the lady with all their might, as they were proud of her stubbornness and honesty. During the meeting, Seraphi earned the respect of many people because she did not back down until the very end. So Duke Felicia was only more pleased that he had such an intelligent daughter-in-law. Thanks to the heroine's efforts, the bill on the protection of commoners was finally passed by the councillor. In this situation, even the prince could do nothing to insist on further reconstruction of the buildings. The heroine was not afraid of the consequences, only because she had the support of Felicia's family. The Duke was especially proud of the girl, thanks to whom the heir would now be unable to accept the law. Although Looney was worried about the lady attracting attention to herself, Seraphi herself did not regret anything. She was able to stand up for her beliefs, so now the commoners were saved from the prince. Although most of the dangers were behind her, the heroine did not even think of putting off questions about the documentation. Together with her friends, she had many more territories to explore for bribery. So far, it seemed that all of the emperor's close associates somehow miraculously owned rich lands. The worst thing was that the Baglos family gradually took over more and more businesses and properties. Orcus personally heard about a family that allegedly died in a disaster after standing up against the Baglos clan. That's why the boy was so worried when he learned about the Duchess's decision to resist. Initially, the girls did not understand what goal the ancient family had been pursuing all this time. But as soon as Seraphi studied the territories they were capturing, she immediately understood everything. The heroine had no doubt that the Baglos family wanted to build a trade on their lands. Even Looney knew it was impossible to build a fair business using such methods. So it was no secret to any of the friends that the Baglos family was planning to deceive and rob. But even after a few days, business between Looney and Seraphi was going surprisingly well. Of course, the Duchess had a plan for every eventuality, but she was glad that everything remained calm. And so it was until Duke Castaigne personally invited Valadus to his estate for a conversation. Seraphi was in no position to refuse a man who was worried about his daughter. The only thing that surprised the heroine was that the Duke himself knew very well what kind of pressure Olin was subjected to. That's why he took the risk of asking Valadus for help, even though he had more authority. Initially, the lady did not plan to leave Lady Castanet without help, so she was going to help the Duke as well. But the man was used to always solving problems on his own, so it was difficult to trust him. He invited the girls to the estate only because they were friends of his beloved daughter. No matter how much Castaigne tried to talk to Ulin, he never came to any result. The result was that the girl almost went crazy with fear, because the letters continued to come to her. It was not difficult for the heroine to guess that now Baglos had promised to deal with her too. That is why all this time Ulin hid the meaning of the letters, continuing to tremble with fear and solitude. But Seraphi became famous for helping many people who found themselves in dangerous situations. And now all she needed was the trust of the Castaigne family, who had found themselves in a hopeless situation. Father and daughter tried to resolve the conflict with the famous Baglos family on their own until the very end. But the Duchess had many more connections and experience when it came to punishing other people. So the girl almost begged her father and daughter to trust her, because then she could start acting. For the first time in their lives, the relatives found themselves in such a hopeless and dangerous situation. Therefore, after much thought, they nevertheless agreed to help, because otherwise they could have died. This is how the heroine was able to get hold of all the letters that Count Baglos brazenly sent to Lady Olin. The girl already had a cunning plan that was capable of teaching this aristocrat a lesson forever. Literally, a few days later, they took action to defeat the unpleasant count. Olin had to gather her strength, because in this plan, she was to play the main role. The girl was perfectly aware of the danger, but she could no longer remain inactive. That's why she went out into the street alone, although she knew that the count would find her right away. Thanks to the people nearby, the lady boldly shouted at Baglos to get away with the flowers. The aristocrat clearly didn't expect that Ulin would finally muster up the courage to ruin his reputation. It always seemed to him that the lady would not be able to find a better candidate for marriage. But Castanet finally rejected the count, who only caused her trouble all the time. And so, along with the discarded bouquet of flowers, Baglos's last hopes for reconciliation faded. He found himself trampled before the people, which particularly hurt the pride of the aristocrat. So when the girl started running into the building, Baglos immediately followed her. Everything inside the man was boiling, so he wanted to personally take revenge on the lady for all the humiliations. No one ever dared to refuse Baglos, which is why he grew up so arrogant and impudent. And now, when his reputation was trampled, the man was even ready to kill. It cost him nothing to take out the knife that he always carried with him in case of self-defense. Only this time, the guy was going to use it on a girl who had nothing to say to him. Castaigne saw Baglos approaching perfectly well, because he didn't even try to hide his reflection. The Count believed that the lady had trampled on his feelings, and so he wanted to take revenge on her for everything that had happened. That's why he didn't hesitate to attack Ulin, even though he had only recently confessed his love to her. In his rage, the man didn't notice that he wasn't alone in the building. He never thought that Olen would be brave enough to lure him into a treacherous trap along with the adults. And in the end, even Looney Mars was at the crime scene, although she was afraid of the aristocrat. Of course, all this was Seraphi's idea, who came up with a way to prove the guilt of the impudent Count. She specially called together the parents of all the children who had received marriage proposals and threats. And now, these people have personally seen that the Baglos family could not be trusted. The heroine's plan worked perfectly, and she even managed to save Olin from imminent danger. Letitia was the first to immobilize the man, as she hated such cruel people. Baglos no longer had a chance to justify himself, because everyone saw his evil intentions. In fact, the Duchess did not want to punish the Count so cruelly, but he did not leave her a chance. At this moment, the prince finally appeared in the room, although he had long doubted whether to show himself. But Esther could not leave his friends in trouble, because he had already once promised to cooperate with the lady. So the heroine had no doubt that she could count on this guy. She saw that the heir still wanted to run away, if only his presence would be unknown. But pride and honor did not allow the guy to remain inactive, since Lady Castaigne needed help. He had never interacted with this girl before, but he really liked her in absentia. That's why Esther took care of Castana, who looked confused at that moment. Miss was ready to accept any help, as fear still gripped her from within. That's why she obediently followed the heir to take her away from this place. Meanwhile, the adults still had to deal with the young Count, who had almost committed a crime. Letitia didn't feel any pity for the boy, because he felt fear, not sympathy or guilt. So the ladies came up with the most terrible punishment for the young man in the form of a conversation with his parents.